Yep. You ready, Richard? Go ahead and call this April 2nd, 2018 meeting of the Whitefish City Council to order. Thanks everyone for coming tonight, and I would ask Judah Gersh to lead us in the pledge, if you may. Thank you, Judah. Our first order of business tonight is a presentation from Dylan Boyle. It's the annual review and consideration of approval for the Whitefish Convention and Visitor Bureau Marketing Plan and FY19 budget. Dylan, welcome.
Thank you very much, Mayor Mulfeld. Good evening, City Council and City staff. I'm just going to plug in my laptop here, so hopefully this works.
It should.
We did test it earlier. All right. I'm here tonight to present you all with information on the activities of the Whitefish Convention and Visitors Bureau, also known as Explore Whitefish, and to make my annual request that the City Council approve the FY19 marketing plan and the public portion of the budget in particular. For your reference, this information can be found on pages 159 to 201 in your packet. And state law does require this approval in order for the Whitefish CVB to receive annual funds from the Lodging Facility Use Tax, also commonly known as the bed tax. And as I mentioned, I do have a slideshow presentation that I'll be utilizing as a visual aid to talk about some of the various areas of activity that we engage in, as well as speaking about some new changes that we are going to incorporate into the FY19 marketing plan that is currently in your packet. However, before I begin, I'd like to introduce the 9 members of the board of directors, some of whom are here tonight. I'm very fortunate to have a very engaged and passionate group to serve at the pleasure of. We have Zach Anderson, who's our chair, representing Restaurant and Bar. Erica Terrell, who also represents Restaurant and Bar. Rhonda Fitzgerald is the secretary treasurer, and she represents Small Lodging. Nick Columbus from Whitefish Mountain Resort. Jennifer Fisher is the representative for Small Lodging, as well as our transportation representative. Mariah Jose is our retail representative from Nelson's Hardware. We have Edna White from Averill Hospitality Large Lodging. Luke Walrath, who represents our at-large arts and culture, and Jake Cook, who represents our at-large technology. And we're also fortunate enough to have 2 agencies here in town that we work with, both who have excellent reputations. Old Town Creative, run by Jen and John Franzen, are our creative agency of record, and LJ Communications, which is comprised of Lisa Jones and Brian Schott, are our public relations agency of record. And one thing to note, during this current fiscal year, we have hired a second full-time in-house person, a marketing and sales coordinator at my office, and his name is Dan Hansen, if you haven't met him before. Our mission at the Whitefish CVB is to promote Whitefish as an authentic travel destination to those outside of the state of Montana. And we do perfectly align with the Montana brand pillars, and I'll just kind of go through those and show you how visually we represent some of those. First brand pillar, more spectacular, unspoiled nature than anywhere else in the lower 48. Vibrant and charming small towns that serve as gateways to our natural wonders. Breathtaking experiences by day, and relaxing hospitality at night. And what we do is we utilize all 3 of these Montana brand pillars in unison to promote exactly what Whitefish is, which is a vibrant and charming small town that provides breathtaking experiences by day, relaxing hospitality at night, and does serve as a gateway to our spectacular, unspoiled nature. We enter into paid advertising in a few different ways. online, print, and out of home in our core geographic target markets, which I mentioned are outside of the state of Montana. And those are, in particular, Seattle and Portland, Chicago, San Francisco, and regional drive-to markets, including Spokane, Washington. Minneapolis and Alberta are what we consider to be established geographic markets where we've had historically strong visitation. And they're both very important for us. However, we've chosen, particularly with Alberta, to not invest in terms of promotion there due to fluctuation in international currency. It does go up year to year. But we are making a few changes to this in FY19, in particular for Minneapolis, even though we are seeing some strong visitation there, and we do year after year in our visitation surveys. We are going to invest some more of our promotion dollars and our public relations efforts in Minneapolis. Obviously, it's a strong market that we see, but also we do have direct flights, so the barrier for transportation is pretty small. And we also do have some awareness already there. We've done some work there in the past, and the Montana Office of Tourism has done some heavy lifting as well. In addition to that, we're looking at California a little bit differently. In the FY18 marketing plan, we talked specifically about San Francisco, but due to some new direct air service that we've had and some expanded service, particularly to Los Angeles coming up here in the late spring, we've decided to look at California, and in particular more San Francisco and LA, more holistically as in California. And once again, just kind of like Minneapolis, we always see California very near the top of our visitor surveys year in and year out. So we're going to look to invest a little bit more of our marketing dollars there. Speaking of that, we do have a distribution of which we use our promotional money. 60% is for winter, 20% for spring, and 20% for fall. And we do leverage those advertising dollars in cooperation with the Montana Office of Tourism and Business Development, Glacier Country Regional Tourism, as well as Whitefish Mountain Resort. And of course, we do continue to support the efforts of Glacier Aero for new and expanded air service, in particular with inbound marketing. This is the 4th year in a row that we have had a cooperative out-of-home campaign with Whitefish Mountain Resort, as well as with some financial or agency assistance from the Montana Office of Tourism. And that is a strong call to action to take the direct flight from Chicago O'Hare to Glacier National Park, or International Airport, in the wintertime. And what we're seeing is some pretty good success with that. We do have one more week left in that flight this year. And right now we're seeing 80% full outbound on those flights and 70% full inbound. So, inbound numbers not as good as it was the last few years, but still above that first year of service. And in terms of outbound, that's pretty close to kind of about where we had been the last few years. So pretty strong numbers there. Now looking forward to spring, which obviously is coming up here, we call that our secret season, and the goal of that is to grow occupancy as well as business levels in the spring period of May and June. And what we're trying to do is we continually look to position Whitefish as the base camp for Glacier National Park. In order to do that, we use a narrative that leads to the spring experience, in particular of riding your bicycle on the Going to the Sun Road. And that's a new ad that we are placing in Adventure Cycling coming up here this spring. Looking to fall, what we call Summer Plus. Again, the goal, grow occupancy as well as business levels, and this is in the autumn period of September through late October, basically coinciding with when the Alpine section of the Going to the Sun Road closes to vehicles. And the narrative, again, for this leads to that idea of the fall experience in Glacier National Park, as well as obviously coming back to our vibrant and charming town, having great meals, great shopping experiences, and having great hospitality in our lodging as well. Something that is also really important for me to mention, primary call to action, as you've all seen on our advertising from year to year, is to visit explorewhitefish.com. And we are getting a new refresh on the consumer side of that coming up here this spring, so I'll be excited to show you guys that when that shows up. Looking toward public relations that I just switched the slide to, as previously mentioned, we do have an outstanding PR team. During FY17, which is our last full year that I have reports for, our PR team reached audiences of over 250 million people. And they hosted 31 media visits during that year in conjunction with our local and regional tourism groups, as well as meeting with over 50 qualified journalists at various media events that we held in Seattle and San Francisco with Glacier Country. And I do just want to mention, just from this winter, some of the direct results of efforts that we've had. Just some names, some titles, and some publications, one of which you see up there, which is Sky's the Limit, and that came out in Ski Magazine Online. Let It Snow was an article in the Alaska Airlines magazine. Montana's Whitefish Mountain scores its skier poll, has local fans in Seattle Times. Montana ski resorts don't get as much love as they should. That was a Condé Nast Travel article that came out this winter. And then a couple fall pieces as well. One was called Best Places to Travel This Fall, and that was a segment on Good Morning LA on their Fox affiliate TV that came out. As well as Eat, Sleep, and Play, Whitefish, Montana, and that was published in Elevation Outdoors. Just a few examples for you. I do also want to mention that the Whitefish CVB PR team works diligently in some communication strategies as well in order to protect the Whitefish brand as well as the economy of Whitefish, and we do work well in conjunction with the city on those strategies. And lastly, since the Olympics is probably still a little bit on our minds, we have and continue to support Maggie Voisin through sponsorship for her, and of course helped with the assistance with the homecoming parade that we had for her back in March. So we're very, very proud of everything that she's done and continue to support her through athlete sponsorship. In addition to the advertising and the public relations efforts that I did mention, we also publish some visitor collateral as well, the official Whitefish travel guide, as well as the Whitefish town map that you've seen, the green maps all around town. This year we printed 25,000 of the travel guides, and we're going to print at least 50,000 of the maps. We've stayed pretty consistent on the travel guides, but the map demand just keeps going up and up. And both pieces are distributed through various channels that are outlined in your marketing plan, including the 4 kiosks that are located in and around Central Avenue. One thing in particular that I'd like to mention is we're currently in the final stages of 2 new information kiosks that are going to be located in the parking structure. And unlike the freestanding kiosks on Central Avenue, they're going to actually be wall-mounted, yet still maintain the same design and color scheme as the freestanding ones. And that's a cooperative project with Public Works. We did receive a grant from the Montana Office of Tourism as well for that, as well as financial support from the Whitefish CVB as well as Heart of Whitefish, and those should be installed later this spring. Throughout the marketing plan, you probably have noticed that we utilize a number of research sources in order to inform our decision making as well as to monitor trends. Although this isn't a complete list, these are some of the major resources that we pull from. 2 in particular I want to mention, one for FY18 that we're currently working on and one for 19. We are just about to put the final report out on the Whitefish Trail Economic Impact Study, which was a study that has been conducted over the past year with Whitefish Legacy Partners, financial assistance from us, as well as Headwaters Economics based in Bozeman, to attempt to quantify the economic impact of Whitefish Trail and outdoor recreation, specifically to businesses here in Whitefish, and what type of money is being spent by both visitors and residents here in town. So we should have that pretty soon as the final report to share. And lastly, I am looking to put some of our public funds into a joint venture research project with the Montana Office of Tourism this coming fiscal year. It's called VisaView, and essentially what it does is it provides us with some expenditure data for visitors here in Whitefish, and that's a hole in the research. We don't have anything to really quantify the actual economic impact of expenditure data in Whitefish. I have that for the county level, but nothing here in town, so that could really help us, especially on a quarterly basis is when I would get those reports, kind of monitor those spending trends and seeing where visitors are spending money and where they're from. So that will be hopefully very, very helpful for us. To summarize here, I will go through the budget with you just in a minute, but we do know that what we're doing is working. Our targeted online ads consistently outperform the industry average, and our media exposure from an earned media perspective continues to grow. And most importantly, that does translate into real business here in Whitefish, as well as doing our best to navigate some of the economic and environmental trends which can dominate the travel and tourism industry from year to year. But we will continue to use creative and innovative ways of which to draw the high-yield, low-impact visitors to Whitefish who we seek. When projecting our annual budget, we take into consideration a number of factors and historical trends. That includes the Whitefish Resort Tax, that includes the Whitefish Bed Tax, as well as the Tourism Promotion Assessment that is collected, that is a part of our private budget from members of the CVB lodging and restaurant community, as well as we do receive preliminary revenue projections from the Montana Department of Commerce as well. And this is all in your packet. I just figured I'd go over it with you real quickly. Here's a breakdown of the budget that I'm asking for approval from you. The total is $110,000. It's broken up about 60-40, 60% going specifically just to ad buys, as I mentioned, and about 40% of it's for marketing support. Here's a breakdown of how it looks consumer-wise. You know, we continue to spend more on online and digital advertising as opposed to print. We just keep making that number bigger for online and digital and less for print every year, just because we're obviously noticing that there's a lot more of the visitor information being conducted and researched online, as well as it's more trackable for us as well. We continue to invest in out-of-home, particularly Chicago and Portland, with those direct flights, as well as for ski season, we do some bus wraps with Whitefish Mountain Resort in Portland as well to drive awareness for skiing and snowboarding here. And a quick breakdown of marketing support here. I do have some, the research budget I mentioned is hopefully for some of that Visa View expenditure information. And then we do have a marketing and publicity personnel person now on staff as well. And the last few years, what I've done is I've used about 40% admin and 40% marketing and publicity. And that's why the budget used to be broken down into those two. Now they're basically combined, and that's why you see it as a larger piece of the pie. I just want to make sure that you guys are aware of that, as it doesn't look like the most even pie chart you've ever seen. And just to give you an idea here, I did mention this in the cover letter. We have our projections for our private budget as well, and I did include that for you all, but we don't have that broken down yet because the CVB board meets next Monday, and that'll give us the full approval of our private budget for our tourism promotion assessment funds. But this does give you up here on this slide just the overall idea when we combine our public and private budgets, how it's broken down by those segments, just so you have an overall idea of what that looks like and what we're projecting as our total budget for the year. And with that, I once again am here to request that the City Council approve the FY19 WCVB marketing plan and the public portion of our budget, which is $110,000. And of course, I would be happy to answer any questions or clarify anything on my presentation for you.
Thanks very much, Dylan. Great job as usual, and I really enjoyed actually reading through the marketing plan. It was very well done. So thanks to you and your board for another great year. Any questions for Dylan? I had one. Why the dip in incoming air travel from Chicago, given the winter we had and the winter others did not have?
That's a really good question. Although the numbers are still pretty good.
Sure.
It always, to me, sometimes is a matter of connections with those flights. And also, so it's coming in, Chicago's obviously a hub, so sometimes we've had big groups, especially last year, for example, have actually missed some of those connections. Okay. Ski councils, ski groups coming out this way. But also, I think, too, that having only one flight on a Saturday versus having multiple during the week is kind of tough sometimes because folks aren't necessarily going to stay for an entire week. So what happens is they will take one of those legs and then they will go back through Denver. Or they might look at it and say, well, I'd rather fly on a Friday and a Tuesday. And in that case, they're only having one connection as opposed to the direct flight. So really our goal is to expand that flight so we can have at least a couple of them. But that's all dependent upon fundraising. And I think if we did have that, you'd see those numbers go up.
Okay. Thanks. Frank?
As long as we're on air travel, my favorite subject. Why, if the inbound was at 70-something%, the outbound's at 80-something%, why is the outbound higher than the inbound?
Also a really good question. What I'll see if I can do is sometimes they're United's a little cryptic in the information that they share with us, but I do get an end of the year report, and sometimes if we request it, we can get a breakdown as well of air travel in terms of who was actually originating from here. Or if that was just visitors taking one leg, or if that was actually local residents either going out for pleasure or for work travel.
Right. Okay. Good.
Thanks, Dylan. Any further questions? We will need a motion to approve the FY19 marketing budget for the CVB and the public portion of their budget in the order of $110,000. Frank?
I'll move to approve.
I second.
Motion has been seconded by Councilor Williams. Further discussion? All All those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and that motion carries unanimously. Thanks, Dylan.
Thank you for your
Appreciate
time.
your time tonight. We'll move on to communications from the public. This is time set aside for the public to comment or address the council on items that are on the agenda but not advertised as a public hearing, or anything you'd wish to share with the council. And just for the record, your name and address when you do approach the podium. Any public comment tonight? Hi.
My name is Nancy Corellis. I'm just here to represent some of my neighborhood over by the, on Railway Street across from the snow lot. And just really concerned and hoping that you reconsider what you're thinking.
I don't mean to
right now.
interrupt you, but this is scheduled for a public hearing. So we'll hold that public hearing in a few minutes regarding the snow lot, the rezone. Thank you, and sorry for interrupting. Ma'am?
Hi, my name is Joy Edwards-Culian, and my address is P.O. Box 5270 Whitefish. I own the property at 465 Armory Road. It's up for approval for annexation tonight. I just wanted to let you know that I'm here and I can answer any questions for you.
Great, thanks very much. Further comments from the public tonight? Not seeing any, we'll stay with the public. Any volunteer board reports from the audience? How about the council? Richard?
Bike Ped met this morning, and just some highlights. First of all, thank you note went out to Eric Berge for his right-of-way donation on Shady River Lane to make that connection from Shady River Lane across to the bike path by the wastewater treatment plant. Number two, the Dalens have given us right-of-way along across their property, and so once we get, and hopefully we will, the Les Schwab right away, that will be key to connect through to River's Edge Park. So the pieces are coming together quite nicely, thanks to the donations from various citizens. There's going to be an open streets event on May 29th in conjunction with the First Farmers Market. The Central will be closed for between Railway and First in the afternoon, and it'll be just a big happening downtown, encouraging people to walk and to ride their bicycles, and those businesses on that particular block will be encouraged to bring their businesses out further onto the streets and the sidewalks. North Valley Hospital showed up with the idea of a healing garden along River Lakes Parkway. They want to extend the bike path on their piece of property and then build a healing garden along the west, just to the west of River Lakes Parkway on their campus. It would be open to the public. There'll be a landscape architect work on that, and an opportunity for various kinds of gardening. It's not like a community garden, but flowers and that sort of thing would be included. And finally, the committee voted unanimously to urge Public Works to begin striping crosswalks and bike lanes as soon as practicable. We realized that it's still, we looked out the window and the snow was coming, and we thought, well, it's going to be a while. So anyway, that was a motion from the board, or the committee.
Thanks, Richard. Further board reports from the council? Not seeing any, we'll move on to our consent agenda. Any changes or additions to the minutes from March 19th, 2018, or a motion for approval? Andy?
I would move to approve the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
Motion seconded by Councilor Hildner. Further discussion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and that's unanimous as well. Michelle? Which moves us on to item 7, which will be item 7A, resolution number 18-2018, 11, a resolution extending the corporate limits of the city of Whitefish, Montana to annex within the boundaries of the city approximately 7.5 acres of land known as 465 Armory Road, for which the owner has petitioned for and consented to annexation, and this appears on page 232 of your packet. Adam or Angie, are you handling this item?
Yeah, I can speak a little bit on this one.
Please.
So this one came in, and this was one of the things that we had talked about in the past and even had kind of a work session to discuss certain things. And so I just wanted to make sure that the property owner was here to be able to address any questions that might come up. And so this is one of those where we're seeing some development happen, and then just before the development is complete, they seek annexation. So I'm not saying that that's what this property owner is doing by any means, but this was one of the fears that we had discussed. And so that's why I just wanted to make sure they were prepared for any questions that might come up, because they're pretty much done with the project that they're building, and now they're seeking annexation. So some of the fear is that there'll be people out there that try to do this as a way of avoiding inspections and different building fees and things that we have with the city. And so we just want to be able to kind of weed through and kind of determine which ones are doing this and which ones are not. And here Joy provided a letter kind of laying out how kind of things happened leading up to this point, the fact that they have other properties that are in the city, that they're going to be doing a few different things. I think the main thing that would need to come out of this one is that, they're looking to annex one parcel, and so that parcel would get one sewer connection. I know there's some future subdivision that they're going to look at doing, and at that time they can seek additional sewer connections at that time. So, that being said, I'm sure you've all had the letter and hopefully had time to read that as well, and Joy can speak to any questions that you might have on that.
Thanks, Adam. Any questions for Adam? And just a reminder, the applicant is here and offered to answer questions as well. I have a few. Currently, where do our water and sewer service lines terminate in relation to this subject property?
In relation to the subject property, there is a sanitary sewer main directly adjacent to the parcel. In Armory Road, the water currently runs as far as Dodger Lane. So the water is about 300 or 400 feet away from the property, but sewer is available.
Under the scenario that we approve this annexation request tonight, who would be responsible for paying for the service extension for the water line?
Based on what's happening with the project, water extension wouldn't be necessary. They could drill a well and serve the property with well water. If they look to subdivide and are not able to provide water for the additional properties, then it would be the applicant responsible for extending the water line.
Okay. And secondly, just for the record or for clarification, this area, this property is within our extension of services plan, correct?
Correct.
Frank?
Once this is incorporated, is the facility finished? I presume it is not. By assuming this, are we going to have to go back in and do the inspections? Or going to be asked to do those and be responsible for them?
That was a question that came up probably a couple of weeks ago, and I know Tad responded to an email that they had sent over that he is not going to be able to do any of the inspections. So many of the things that he would have to inspect are already covered up, and so they would have to just continue to finish the project as they, have permits from the county. They do have electrical and plumbing permits from the county, but things like foundation and other things that are, now covered up by sheetrock and everything, we're not going to be able to see. There's no sheetrock at this point? Oh, okay.
Well, not that I think that there's necessarily an exposure here, but we've been dragged into one lawsuit involving even a piece of property that was in and was theoretically inspected by us. Are we, by incorporating this facility now, going to increase or have that likelihood be any higher?
I don't think so, Frank. Tad and I talked kind of at length about it. And I mean, it was in the county when it was begun, and there's just no way to go back and do inspections that would have been required had they been in the city, so.
I agree. Thank you.
I have a question, Angie, or Adam, or Craig, actually. It's my understanding portions of the other two parcels were subdivided via family transfer, so they didn't go through any type of review. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is our understanding at the county level. That was something that we had met a while back, and they told us that they're willing to go whatever subdivision review that our processes have.
So could they legally evade our subdivision process if they wanted to further subdivide this property via family transfer?
Well, I mean, they could apply for an exemption to subdivision, but ultimately, if it's determined that they're trying to evade our subdivision regulations, then they will have to go through subdivision review.
Okay, thank you.
But they did say that they were planning on coming through our subdivision review process, so.
Thanks. Richard?
So we started with County SAG 10, is that right? Isn't that where we started on that property? And now we are essentially creating, if we were to annex the property into the city, all of a sudden, instead of County SAG 10, we now have how many subdivision lots?
Is it still SAG 10, or did you get the SAG 5 designation? Yeah, so I think they're currently at SAG 5.
But we don't know that for sure?
I think we're pretty sure on that. Okay. And when we annex a property into the city, we bring it to our closest designation. So that would be 2.5 acre.
But it's already 2.5 because of the family division, so do we get another division?
This 7.5 acre piece has not been taken down yet. So the thought is they're gonna come in to subdivide it into 3 2.5 acre parcels through our subdivision review process.
But there's only one sewer stub, is that right?
Correct. So when they come in for the 3, they would also have to apply for 2 additional sewer connections. It is SAG 5, okay.
Okay, thank you.
One other question to this point. As I understand it, the family transfer issues were with respect to a larger piece that this was just part of. Is that correct? So is this parcel going to be therefore eligible for further family transfers?
I mean, it was my understanding that the adjacent lots were the ones that were family transferred. This one hasn't had it, wasn't part of that family transfer. They just own some additional property that's next door to that.
Correct.
So this particular lot wasn't part of the previous family transfer. And it wouldn't, since they've already used that, I mean, we would, because all family transfers come through our department, and so we would make them go through a full subdivision.
Okay.
And as part of that condition of approval, we could require that the applicant pay for the water extension?
That's the way it's designed, isn't it?
Correct?
Subdivision.
Yes. If they came in for subdivision, we could require that.
Yes.
Okay. Thanks.
I will move to approve. Oh, go ahead.
Richard?
I have another question. So what we have is a house that was being built in the county that has no septic approval because of high groundwater. I'm sorry?
Do you mind approaching the mic, please? And just name and address again for the record, please.
Joy Edwards Culian, P.O. Box 5270, Whitefish. And it does have level 2 septic approval. We did get that. But it's been recommended to us by the subcontractors who are out there working that we seek annexation for sewer because there's been leaking in the basement of the foundation with high groundwater.
Begs the question how the county approved it.
Well, it's a level 2 system, so it's most likely a raised mound to get the separation to the groundwater.
Wow, okay. Is that,
It's also, there's an existing system out there, correct?
Yes, it
I
has an
mean, there-
existing septic.
There is an existing house on the property. This isn't new construction. It's just a significant remodel, or renovation, if you will. And so they were using the existing county-approved septic system, which has been in place for 20, 30 years, if not more. So this isn't a new county septic approval. It's just a remodel on a home using an existing septic system.
but one of the problems we've had on the lake is that remodels are much bigger than the original septic system was approved for. Would this be approved for that same, for the newer size?
No, we got additional, we got a separate approval for this.
Based on the number of toilets and,
Right, yes.
okay.
Andy?
Joy, I heard something different from Dave other than what I read in your letter, but were there 3 lots created with the family transfer? Because you say there were 17 acres and then Sands helps us create the 3 lots.
Right. Well, there's 3 lots now. The one that we're talking about, 465 Armory Road, was where an existing house was. And that's what we're talking about tonight. And there's 2 additional lots that are from the original piece.
But was that a separate lot? At a house, but was it a separate lot? Or was the 17 acres one contiguous piece of
It was
property?
one continuous piece of property.
Okay, so
and
3
then
lots were created through the
now
family
we-
transfer?
Right,
Okay.
it's 3
I
instead
thought
of
I'd
1.
read that correctly. Thank you.
Are you ready for a motion?
Frank? Yes.
Can I
Andy?
indulge one more question of staff? Probably a question for Craig and Dave both. So what happened was we had a subdivision created and through family transfer prior to annexation. And we had a house constructed or remodeled, whichever you want to look at it, prior to annexation, which didn't require then any building permits from the city. So my question is, apart from the building permit side of it, what difference would there have been in terms of extensions of services or what we would have required them to do had they annexed the 17 acres, then subdivided, subject to our subdivision regulation? What would we have ended up with differently? What would we have required them to do that they were not required to do because they did a family transfer?
Well, it would have been a minor subdivision that already had all the road accesses, and I mean, we would have made them connect to the sewer and or water if water was necessary, but, and then obviously building permits on any construction after that point, but there isn't a lot of differences other than the building permit.
Would there been any difference, Craig, in what we would have required for extension of services?
No, I don't think so. There is an existing sewer main that serves the lots that were created through the family transfer, and the lots are of a large enough size that I think well water is applicable. And so I don't think, even if they had gone through the city subdivision process, that we would have required water extension.
Thank you.
Frank?
And again, if there's going to be water extended to this lot, that'll be the responsibility of the owner, correct?
Correct. In the future, if this 7.5 acre parcel is subdivided and it's deemed necessary to extend the water, that would be at the expense of the property owner.
Thank you. You ready?
Yes, please.
Okay. I would move to approve Resolution 18-10, I believe it is. A resolution extending corporate city limits.
1811.
1811, excuse me, 1811, extending corporate city limits, no, excuse me, the corporate limits of the city of Whitefish, Montana to annex within the borders of the city approximately 7.5 acres of land known as 465 Armory Road.
Is there a second to the motion?
I'll second.
Seconded by Councilor Williams. Frank, would you like to address your motion?
I guess my feeling on this is that whether this had been done, we missed an opportunity for some building inspections possibly, and maybe some permits. The practical side is that I am happy to have property on sewer rather than on septic. And I'm also happy to extend the corporate city limits out Armory Road. I think it's the right thing to do. So,
Thanks, Frank. Further discussion? Andy?
Yeah, I guess just a couple of comments. While I tend to believe in the inherent honesty of everybody, I'm not going to say you did it this way to not deal with our subdivision regulations and buy a permit, but I'm not going to say that you didn't either. I don't know. Only you know that. But I guess what I would like to, and I'll vote for the motion simply because we kind of would have ended up in the same place anyway, but I think we kind of need to maybe figure out a way to look at it from the city's side, because sometimes people are going to do it and we're going to end up with something that we shouldn't really end up with. And in this case, like I said, we're going to end up at the same place regardless. But I don't know if there's some way we can take a look at it and put it on our calendar or something to think about, is look at some kind of policy if we get these in the future, because it is a way for people to not deal with our subdivision regulation, and it is a way for people to not pay a building permit, and quite frankly, that's not fair to the rest of us that have to do those things, so.
And I believe some of that will be addressed in the extension of services plan that we'll see at the next council meeting, but further discussion? All those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and that motion carries unanimously. Thanks for your time tonight. We will now move on to our public hearings this evening. We do have 5 public hearings scheduled. We'll start with item 8A, which will be ordinance number 18-10, an ordinance amending zoning regulations in Whitefish City Code, Title 11, Chapter 6, regarding off-street parking and loading, and this will be on a first reading. Wendy.
Okay, good evening. Again, this is a request by Judah Gersh to amend the off-street parking and loading for multifamily dwelling units for studio and one-bedroom apartments. The current parking standards for family or multifamily residential uses, regardless of the size of the unit, is 2 spaces per dwelling unit plus 1 guest space for each 3 units. The addition of the guest parking was added to the zoning regulations in '94. I wasn't able to find any analysis as to why they did that, but I was able to find the file. In the past 24 years, our knowledge base and community values have changed considerably. Today, we're concerned about water quality standards as they pertain to stormwater runoff, and we recognize the importance of minimizing impervious surface to protect water quality. We also have an increased opportunity and options for alternative forms of transportation than we did 24 years ago. So the city has adopted the strategic housing plan recently, and we're in the process of reviewing the climate action plan, which you all looked at tonight. Both plans recommend reducing parking requirements for various reasons. The strategic housing plan, adopted just last fall under the category for zoning for affordability, which is intended to provide incentives for developers and builders to construct affordable housing. It suggested that we change the parking requirements for residential units to be based on unit size, the number of bedrooms, and possible location requirements, locational standards. The plan further describes how our parking standards are excessive, especially for the smaller units. So while this proposal is only geared towards studio efficiency apartments and 1-bedroom apartments as part of our zoning for affordability proposals, we will be looking at all multifamily sizes, so the council should expect some further amendments to our parking chapter as we're moving forward implementing the strategic housing plan. Also, as part of the zoning for affordability, I've been visiting with builders and developers of housing and asking them about kind of what's limiting them from developing some affordable housing. And one comment that someone made was anything that takes up space. So I thought that was pretty pertinent to what we're talking about tonight. The Climate Action Plan, again, that you guys looked at tonight, identifies a number of strategies to conserve energy in the city, but also actions to enhance community resilience and prepare for the effects of climate change. One of the early recommendations is consider reducing the minimum parking requirements for new development to reduce impervious surfaces, reduce urban heat island effect, and reduce stormwater runoff, allowing water to infiltrate and recharge aquifers. So the proposal is for 1.25 spaces for a studio or efficiency unit and 1.5 spaces per one-bedroom unit. And then 2.33 would still remain for all larger types of units. So that's unchanged. As part of the application, which is in your packet, the applicant included a survey of other communities in Montana and other mountain towns that provide support for this text amendment. And parking requirements in Whitefish are considerably higher than other communities. The city of Kalispell, which wasn't included in that survey, but I thought was kind of interesting, requires 1 space per efficiency unit and then 1.5 spaces for all other units. So again, quite a bit more than Whitefish. Staff supports the bedroom count as this is recommended as part of the strategic housing plan. The planning board held a public hearing on March 15th. 2 members of the public spoke in opposition to the proposed text amendment. The planning board, there was only 6 people there, so we had a tie. There was a motion made for denial, that failed. There was a motion made for approval, that failed. Then there was a unanimous recommendation to send it to you folks without a recommendation, so that is what you have before you. A couple of questions that came up during the public hearing process. I think Richard asked what happens with the half a parking space, and if it's half or more, we round up. So that's how that works. And then also, I would point out again that our accessory apartment standards, which is a 600 square foot apartment, that's accessory, of course, to a single family, we only require 1 parking space. And we typically find that those are 1-bedroom units. So this is kind of in keeping with what those standards are. So staff does still recommend approval of this recommendation. So can I answer any questions for you?
Thanks, Wendy. Any questions for Wendy on her staff report? Frank?
Wendy, I don't have as a general proposition any opposition to reducing our required parking requirements, with the exception that I am concerned about how it will be shoveling additional vehicles onto our streets for parking purposes. And that's my biggest concern, because I have lived in efficiency units of 600 square feet, and guess what? There were 2 of us there. And guess what? We had 2 cars. And I'm afraid that that's, I mean, the idea that it's only 600 square feet, so we're only going to have 1 person in it is like, not happening. Are there ways that we deal with this in terms of, to the extent somebody is an owner of a unit that only has 1 parking space, they only get to have 1 car on site? I mean, can that be addressed in some form or fashion so we're not just shoveling their second car onto the street someplace close?
Well, I think that's probably an option that the leasing manager can provide. It doesn't sound like that's terribly uncommon. And again, it's, 1.25 spaces, so it is kind of accommodating folks that maybe there are 2 folks living in an apartment. Because we're doing, adding that extra 0.25 for an efficiency unit or half. So it isn't just 1 for 1.
Is this for leased units or is this for
All
owned units?
Multifamily, so it could be owned,
Owned
leased,
or
rented.
leased. Okay. So the restrictions on an owner, how do you put those in place? Because you're not leasing it.
Right. Yeah, and that's kind of beyond the zoning regulations.
Would it also apply in zones that permit short-term rentals less than 30 days?
Yeah, I mean, it's all, for all multifamily is what the proposal is right now.
And so what happens if somebody builds a big structure real close to downtown and all of a sudden we end up even in worse shape for downtown parking and pushing that into that parking into the neighborhoods?
And I guess, we're talking about on-site parking, we're not talking about on-street parking, so.
Right, but
for
that
their
would force it into the streets, would it not? As if in Frank's
I mean, I
example?
suppose, yeah, but a lot of our streets are designed to accommodate parking on the streets. Within a 60-foot right-of-way, a lot of our streets are designed to have parking on both sides.
Assuming there is no snow. Okay.
Further questions for Wendy? During the public hearing, I'm about to open it up for public comment. We did advertise for a public hearing on what will be ordinance 18-11, and we'll hold that public hearing now. Sir, if you'd like to approach the podium after I allow Judah Gersh, the applicant, to actually present to the council. Thanks, Judah.
Judah Gersh, 121 Wisconsin Avenue. I've been a lawyer in Whitefish for over 20 years. I'm not here on behalf of a client here on my own, but I have worked with numerous clients over the years, and the single thing that basically kills building any studio and one-bedrooms apartments is all the land you have to donate or dedicate for parking to them. At that point, why build a small unit? You might as well build a 2 or 3 bedroom, build it fancy, make it expensive, and everybody's happy with their 2 or 3 cars. But what we really need are these studio and one bedrooms for people to live in. I think a large portion of the on-street parking problem downtown is because you have so many houses full of roommates. You'll have a 3-bedroom house with 3 or 4 roommates and 3 or 4 cars. Those houses, those streets aren't meant to accommodate that kind of density and that kind of living situation, but that's what people are forced into, because if you don't have a roommate situation, you basically don't have anywhere to live in Whitefish. There just are not studio and one-bedroom apartments. The size of these are smaller now than they used to be. We don't see 600 square foot ones anymore. The ones I'm looking at doing are 450 square foot studios and 512 square foot one bedrooms. I'm fortunate that behind my office on Wisconsin Avenue, behind it on Colorado Avenue, I have enough land to do this and put in all the required parking. It first really came to a head for me when you lay out the site plan with surveyors and you see basically a sea of asphalt there. It's like, geez, why do we have so many parking spots for such small units? And that's just driven by this parking requirement. Now, on the one hand, we'd all like to have all the parking in the world, a parking spot anytime we want it. My wife and I have 2 cars. If there was more parking, maybe we'd have 3 or 4 in a camper, and park a boat out there on the street too. But that's just not the reality. At some point, if you're renting in a complex with limited parking spots because they're small units, they say, the manager shouldn't be leasing these things to 3 and 4 people per room like we see in the downtown houses, but also they should be leased to people who don't have a lot of cars, who are walking to work downtown, who are walking to Marcus Foods and aren't, if you can afford to drive all over the place and have multiple cars, you really shouldn't be living in a studio or one bedroom, or if you choose to, great, but you very likely do not have this huge number of cars. This issue's obviously been debated in cities throughout the country, and I spent hours and hours pulling these codes from all these other jurisdictions. I was basically shocked that Whitefish is the only one that still has this really, really heavy parking requirement, and all sorts of other cities have gone to much lesser requirements for these smaller units. Even extent Kalispell's ahead of us on this ground and is getting studio and one bedrooms built. So the question, is it suitable for the nightly rental zones? Maybe not. Maybe you make this only apply in the R4 high density zone. It doesn't necessarily need to be in the B3 zone or in the RR1 nightly rental type zones. The only reason I proposed the amendment the way I did is because that's how the current code is written. It applies across all zones. But you could certainly state that this would only apply in the R4 zone, for example, which is our high density residential zone. Other than that, I'm available to answer any questions anybody may have, or especially in regards to the research I've done, if anybody has any questions or concerns about how other cities came to this.
Thanks, Judah. Any questions for Judah? Maybe not now, but perhaps later. Sir, if you have a comment, now is your time to approach the council. No, they're separate public hearings, so if you'd like to speak to this issue, now would be the time. Thanks. And just your name and address, please.
Hi, I'm Jan Carlson, 21 Summers Avenue. I guess the only thing on your proposal that's come up is, I don't know if the parking is the same streetwise, but your ordinance is 24 hours, right? That you can only leave a car on the street for 24 hours and then it has to be moved?
I don't think that's the
Is that
case. Is that
everywhere in
true?
Whitefish, or? Okay.
Okay.
So I guess you'll need to address that, because obviously if he's gonna have people park on the street, their cars aren't gonna be moved every 24 hours. So I guess, there's a sort of conflict there.
Thanks for your comments. Rhonda?
Good evening. Rhonda Fitzgerald, 412 Lupfer Avenue. While I support revisiting the parking requirement in Whitefish, and obviously the Climate Action Plan calls for that, and as does the Affordable Housing Plan, I think that this particular request is not ready for prime time. And I think it needs to go back to the drawing board because it has absolutely no sideboards whatsoever. We should look at the parking requirement by zone. We should look at the parking requirement by square foot size of the unit. We should definitely consider the location and whether it's close to transit or not, which of course it isn't because we have no transit. And we should definitely link a reduced parking requirement to affordability. If you leave it open-ended and it applies to any unit in any zone at any size, you have not actually accomplished what is called for in, for instance, the Affordable Housing Plan. You have to link it to affordability. Otherwise, you've just created a lower cost for the developer, but no guarantee of a lower rent for the renter. And this is really a request tailored for one specific project because Judah was encouraged to bring this to you, and so it's about his project, but that's not a very good way to do planning. And so I'm hoping that we could work on a really comprehensive solution that would work and would work for Judah and for other people who want to build units, because I really want to encourage that and not discourage it. But for instance, the WR4, which are the densest, closest in neighborhoods in our town, already have on-street parking problems. And if we want to encourage infill and more density, the last thing we want to do is make the neighbors hate that. And they will hate it if you build some fourplexes close in a WR4 neighborhood, and you only require 1.25 or 1.5 spaces, you're going to get 6 or 8 more cars on a street that already doesn't have enough parking. And then the community will be opposed to the whole idea of density and infill. So, I mean, let's take the time to get this right. We have no idea if these are the right numbers. To Frank's point, when I've lived in a one-bedroom, I had 2 jobs, and my husband had a job, and we each had a car because we had to go to work. And we had friends who came to visit because we lived in places where they could ski, and they had a car. And I just think we need to take into consideration the realities of Whitefish and what those parking needs are. At the same time, I'm all about limiting the amount of impervious surface. I'm all about not having excessive unused parking, and I want to have solutions that we come up with linked to affordability. Thank you.
Thanks, Rhonda. Rebecca.
Rebecca Norton, 530 Scott Avenue. So I was against this on the planning board because I don't like the way it came through to us. I think Judah should get a refund for the money he's expended because he's done so much work on behalf of the city. But it reminds me a little bit of spot zoning, how he has a timeline to work within to get his approval done. And so our staff encouraged him to do this, to push that along. But I agree with Rhonda. I think the intention is wonderful. Even when we've talked about this in the WB2 maybe 4 years ago, a lot of the standards were kind of similar to what we were thinking. But I think applying it globally to our city without actually looking at who's going to be using transit when we don't have any really. We sometimes have 9 months of winter. I mean, we really do have to rely on cars a lot. So if you're going to take away the right to park and push it onto the side streets where people are already living, I think it could make an unlivable situation for a lot of the people that do already live here. So I really think it should be slowed down, and we should look at which zones this is appropriate for, which ones aren't. What are we going to do with long-term transportation ideas? All of the sustainability things are wonderful, but it just came really quickly to the planning board. It's coming to you without a recommendation, I think, Richard, right? And it's a really important part of our growth. If we don't get it right, we could have a really frustrating situation, not only for the people that are coming here to vacation, but also for the people that live here. And so I think it should be fleshed out more and not approved yet. And I still think Judah should get a refund because he did so much work on it. And I just don't think it's fair that he should be charged for that money. So, thanks.
Thanks, Rebecca. Kate?
Hi, my name is Kate McMahon. I live at 151 Wedgewood Lane in Whitefish, and I am speaking as a resident. I'm not, even though I'm a planning consultant, I'm not involved with this project in any way. I just happened to be at the meeting tonight for another matter. And I saw that this was on the agenda, but I was on the Climate Action Committee, and I actually was the lead in drafting the transportation and land use chapter of that. So the recommendation that we review parking areas to reduce impervious area. I was the one who pulled that information together. I've also, as a city planner, I have a degree in city planning. I've worked in this field for over 35 years, and I can't even tell you how many parking ordinances that I have worked on throughout the country, in resort communities, in suburban communities, in university communities. And I would say that most of them do have breakdown parking requirements by efficiency and two-bedroom. There's anecdotal information that people have brought to you that more than one people will live in an efficiency apartment. But when I write zoning regulations, I look at the International Parking Association, I look at the American Planning Association standards, and the division of having 1 to 1.5 spaces for an efficiency apartment is pretty standard across the country and has not created problems. And I think if you're going to, look at that, you can't rely on anecdotal information. You really need to go to the parking demand studies, which demonstrate that 1 to 1.5 parking spaces for an efficiency unit is plenty. Also, if you look at trends, and I've been working in this field for 30 years, household size has generally declined over 30 years. Millennials don't drive cars. You have more car sharing services. So all of the trends are lending towards people having fewer cars. We're also going to have autonomous vehicles coming in, which will impact that as well. I also looked at standards throughout Montana, just because I'm familiar with the zoning ordinances around the state. I've worked with a lot of them. And Mr. Gersh, who I've never met before, is completely right in that Whitefish has the most excessive standards for efficiency apartments anywhere. Not only Kalispell, but Great Falls, Billings, Bozeman, Butte, all of them require less than 2. So there's really not a strong argument for saying that Whitefish needs to have more. Red Lodge, which is similar to Whitefish and being a resort community, they only require, I think, 1 parking space for an efficiency unit. And finally, I would like to read to you, this is from the Environmental Protection Agency Climate Action page, and they actually have a white paper on parking spaces and finding the balance with smart growth solutions. So I'm just going to quote one of the reasons why this ended up in the Climate Action Plan, is that construction of surface parking often paves ground that once absorbed and filtered rainwater. This increased stormwater runoff, which can result in more flooding. The oil and other pollutants wash off the parking lot and exacerbate water pollution. Dark pavement can artificially raise air temperature, resulting in heat islands that raise air conditioning bills. In undeveloped areas, forests, wetlands, and other natural features should be considered part of the region's green infrastructure that process stormwater, clean the air, and provide wildlife habitat. Ensuring that parking areas are sized to development instead of a generic requirement can preserve this infrastructure. If we wait and study this more, we're just going to have more land that's paved over. And I don't think we should wait. I think we should start promoting the green space. When I saw this was on the agenda and we were talking about the climate action plan in the working session, I was really excited because we have an opportunity to enact something right now that can benefit our wetlands and benefit our stormwater. And I don't think we should wait and study this anymore. There's really no factual evidence that backs up having 2 parking spaces for an efficiency unit. And I have not seen that in 30 years of planning. Thank you.
Thanks, Kate. Appreciate the comments. Further public testimony tonight on this item? Further public comments? I'll go ahead and close the public hearing and turn it back to council for a motion or discussion. Who would like to begin? Andy.
I would make a motion. I would move that we, excuse me, I have a little frog in my throat there, that we adopt our ordinance 18-10, adopting on a first reading, and that's adopting findings of fact from WZTA 18-02 and the non-recommendation from our planning board.
Is there a second to the motion?
I'll second.
Motion seconded by Melissa. Andy, would you like to speak to your motion?
Yeah, I thought about this a lot, and it's probably one of the smaller items in some ways on our agenda tonight, but I did really think about it a lot, and I hear some of the arguments, but I think that the fact that we do require more than just about anybody anywhere really is a wake-up call for me. The other part of it's a wake-up call for me is the paved area in the city, and I mean, I think that that's a huge issue for us. Even before I read it in the staff report, the first thing I'd read is through my packet in order, like I tend to not usually do, and had seen the recommendation for that in the climate action plan, and I thought, wow, that's a really great idea. Some of the arguments that I've heard tonight, one is, oh, well, what about, in areas where there's going to be overnight rentals? Well, the reality is if it's overnight rental, it's probably much more likely it's only going to be 1 car, especially in an efficiency, because you're probably not going to have 3 people traveling in 3 different cars coming to overnight rent in a 425 square foot unit. That's my guess. The fact that we only require 1 space for 600 square foot accessory dwelling units in the community is a big one for me too, I think. So, I mean, while I understand some of the arguments, and I just really do think that it's something that that we should do.
Thanks, Andy. Further discussion on the motion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and that motion does carry unanimously. I guess the fee won't get waived. Thanks, Judah. We will move on to item 8B, which will be ordinance 18-11, an ordinance rezoning approximately 1.47 acres of land known as the snow storage lot located at the northeast corner of Columbia Avenue and Railway Street in section 36, Township 31 North, Range 22 West in Flathead County, Montana, from our own WI, which is our industrial and warehousing zoning district, to our own WR4, which is our high-density multifamily residential, and adopting findings with respect to such rezone on a first reading. Hillary.
Thanks. Good evening. So the purpose of this proposed rezoning is to facilitate implementation of the Whitefish Strategic Housing Plan, which was adopted last November. The plan identifies the development of the snow storage lot into 30 to 40 workhouse housing units as a top strategic priority. And right now, with the industrial zoning, residential development is not permitted or conditional use. The 1.64 acre parcel includes the unplatted right-of-way for Columbia Avenue. And since we should have zoning that goes to the middle of the road right-of-way, we would subtract the westerly 30 feet of that road right-of-way, which will eventually be platted. And so the total that would be rezoned would be about 1.47 acres. So the rezoning was reviewed in accordance with the zoning regulations, and just the more pertinent findings. Finding 1, the proposed change to WR4 high-density multifamily residential is in accordance with the growth policy because it complies with the land use designation identified in the 2018 amendment to the growth policy, which was the revised downtown master plan we did earlier this year. Finding 6, the proposed zone change will not affect motorized and non-motorized transportation systems because, depending on the number of trips generated per day, a traffic impact study would be conducted prior to development of the lot, and any measures identified to mitigate negative impacts to the transportation system would be implemented. And the city will also consider obtaining an easement for or ownership of Summers Avenue north of Railway, which is on the other side of the parcel from Columbia Avenue. And then finding number 9, the proposed zone change will conserve the value of any buildings because first, there are no buildings on the land for which the zone change is proposed. And because for adjacent buildings, measures to mitigate additional traffic, if identified by a traffic impact study, would be implemented. Off-street parking will be included with any new housing, and industrial uses will no longer be permitted. So based on the review and findings of fact, staff recommended to the planning board to adopt the staff report, recommend to the city council that the zoning map amendment be approved. Leading up to the first public hearing at the planning board meeting, adjacent landowners within 150 feet and advisory agencies were noticed. Legal notice was published in the Whitefish pilot. We received 4 comments in opposition to the rezoning as of last week, and then today we received one more comment in opposition, which I think Michelle provided to you earlier. Reasons for opposition include the potential for negative impact on the neighborhood, aesthetics of a multi-story apartment building in a neighborhood of primarily single-family homes, concerns about associated parking, traffic and safety issues, loss of views, narrow streets, and potential to create a tunnel effect if we're building right to the lot line. Also the potential for negative impact on the city budget related to moving the snow storage location. So where are we going to put it if it's not here? And as well, potential impacts to downtown businesses if we can't clear the streets as quickly of snow. So if we have to drive the snow further away. The public hearing at the planning board, which March 15th, 3 members of the public spoke. 2 of them in opposition, primarily related to the character of the neighborhood and whether apartment buildings or whatever type of housing is envisioned here would fit with the characteristics of the neighborhood. Also concerns about traffic that would be generated and a potential lost opportunity for maintaining open space in Whitefish. Rhonda spoke in favor of the rezoning because it would help implement the downtown district master plan and would be a high quality asset for Whitefish. At the planning board meeting, the board voted 4-1 and recommended approval of the rezoning. And as a result, staff is respectfully requesting that you approve the ordinance rezoning the snow storage lot from industrial to high density multifamily residential. And if there's any questions, I'd be happy to try and answer them.
Thanks, Hillary. Any questions for Hillary? Richard?
Yeah, I had a call earlier today, a person asking, and I suggested that any development, housing development on this lot would have to go through architectural review. Is that correct? Did I give them good information?
I believe so.
Okay, thanks.
I would also say I've been sitting in on some of the strategic housing committee ad hoc subcommittee, and there will be quite a lengthy public vetting process, I believe.
In terms of architecture and everything else?
Whatever is going there, yeah.
Okay, great, thank you.
Frank?
Hillary, with the existing industrial zoning for that particular property, what height restrictions would there be on structures that could possibly be put on that currently?
I don't know about the height restriction.
35 feet.
So it could go up 35 feet.
Which is the same as the proposed residential zoning.
Correct.
There are a number of other types of uses, obviously, that could go in there as industrial zoning. But
right, okay, thank you.
Further questions for Hillary? There might be later. Okay. Thanks, Hillary. We did advertise for a public hearing, and we'll hold that public hearing now, which will be for our own resolution 18-11. If you're wishing to provide comment, now would be the opportunity. Thanks for waiting and your name and address for the record, please, when you approach the council.
Hi, my name is Judy Canzona Gephardt. I live at 825 Railway Street, right across the street from the snow lot. And I'm here to represent communication I've had from some neighbors with other concerns about the proposed rezoning. If for some reason it doesn't work out for residential for whatever reason, does it then get rezoned back to industrial? You know, there's so many questions that the neighborhood really does have about this. The biggest issue, I think, that comes to create fear in their minds is the word high density. Just to let you know that that's the biggest fear, is these apartments, you know, and I've tried to answer some of the questions as I am on the ad hoc committee for this, but I don't know all the answers. And I know this is just the planning of the rezoning, not the actual designing. But, you know, you can't unring the bell. And I've had people knocking on my door at night and calling me with all of these concerns that have been addressed as far as traffic, parking, I mean, high density living. And I just would like you to consider that when you're considering the rezoning, that, you know, we do know there is a need for housing in downtown Whitefish that is affordable, but then there's also the aspect of the respect for the neighbors and the people that have committed themselves to this community and this town, as I have for 40 years. So if you just take that into consideration, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy. Who's next?
Hi, my name is Nancy Corellis, and I live at 817 Railway, right across from the snow lot, next door to Judy. And we are very concerned about this new possible building across the street with where the snow lot is. That street seems to be pretty narrow, especially summers. That curves around, it's not through, then you run right into the school. In the mornings, you have a line of cars, people dropping their children off, or school buses. So they try to come around this way and they're lined up. You got lots of kids there. You know, at times, like in the winter, it's hard for them to get by. This year, we actually had a school bus come down our alley because they couldn't get down through there. And the only reason why they got down the alley is because one of our neighbors had this alley snowplowed out. I get stuck back there a lot. You know, we have to park a lot on that street. And then if you put an apartment building right there, you're going to double the cars. We sit there and, you know, like when you have your farmer's market, the streets are full, up and down Summers, Columbia, all around. You've got your arts festival, and they come in 2 or 3 days early to get their place, their little camper. Then they have their trailer, they bring in all their art stuff. And you've got people with the Huckleberry Days, with the Winter Carnival, I don't care what it is, there is no parking. You can't park by the school. And so, I mean, we're not going to be able to find a parking place. And I try to park in the alley. It's very difficult in the winter. Like I said, I've gotten stuck multiple times. I know Jenny very well with the snowplow people. And I appreciate that, but I would much rather have the snow lot there instead of a apartment building, because I know good and well there's going to be more than one people living in a one-room apartment. There'll probably be the people that work downtown when the bars close. People are there, they'll come over, they'll fall asleep at their friend's house. It's going to be multiple cars, lots of traffic. I'm wondering about the kids' safety. I mean, we have I'll tell you, it's just the school kids is really what I'm concerned about. And the parents dropping them off and stuff, and it's a lot of traffic at different times. And I really think you need to reconsider where the people you want these art festivals and stuff to come in. You got to have a place for them along the streets and stuff to park and put their buildings, you know, their little trailers. But an apartment building across the street there is, I just can't see it. And I just really, really hope, like Judy said, for the residents over there, to please reconsider that. I mean, the trains, don't mind the trains. I mean, you even have those specialty trains that back up, and they have generators that run all night long. They have put spotlights up. We deal with a lot of stuff, but I would rather put up with all of that. The snowplow trucks that start at 2 o'clock in the morning, banging, trying to get the snow out. And then you have to get up at 4 to go to work, and then you get stuck in the alley. I'll deal with all of that instead of apartments. I mean, I just really, really think you need to reconsider I'm with Judy. All the neighbors over there are really very concerned about an apartment building being put there. And where are you going to put the snow? That's my other thought.
Thanks,
Hello.
Nancy.
I'm Robin Corellis, the other part of Nancy. We live at 817 Railway. We're right directly across the street from the snow lot. We're right in the middle of the block, and that place gets jammed up like you wouldn't believe, especially when all the different events are going on, not counting just the people that park out there. Judy's got two cars in front of her house. We usually have one or two, and we're lucky we have a carport in the alley, and when it's paved, we can actually park back there. But the city doesn't actually pave it most of the time unless Nancy calls somebody down here and gets it done. So that can be a hassle. But I'm just kind of sharing what actually she said also, which is I think it's going to be a train wreck. It's going to be a log jam, basically. Because if you put 30 to 40 units in there, I think that's the number I heard. I'm not sure. I'm just now becoming aware of this. And I can't imagine how that's going to work. And then we're talking about an issue with less greenery, more asphalt and cement. That's all it's going to be is asphalt and cement. I don't know how this helps anything. It just seems to go against everything that's common sense. You have a perfect area for parking there that's right there next to downtown, that we see a lot of vehicles and RVs and so forth pull in there during the different events. Just to name a few, the farmers market once a week, that goes on, I guess, half a year. The Whitefish Arts Festival, the Huckberry Days, the Trail Hootenanny, the Snow Bus Brew Fest, the Community Celebration, and the Oktoberfest, and that's just a few that I can think of right off the bat. Then you have the school right next to it, okay? This is a high-traffic area. The other thing about that little spot right in there, if you've ever been down there, you've driven past the train station east and had to turn back south, because that's the only way you can turn, and you go by the school. The only way out over there is down in front of the train station if you take that route, and then you're pumped into downtown there, or you turn, I think the street is Columbia, if I'm not mistaken. We're between Columbia and Summers, and out. And that corner is right there on that main corner, Railway and Columbia we're talking about. Now, if you go east towards Summers, it dead ends, and then if you go north, it's dirt road that runs toward the railroad and then cuts back right, and it's really not anything. We see people on it every once in a while, but not really much. So the only real way out of there is to make another right on Summers and then go back south. So you can't go out north. There's no getting out north, past the railroad tracks, unless you go left in front of the train station. And then east, you can't, there's no getting out that way. So everything, two roads, Summers and Columbia, going back to the south, and then on Railway, you go back by the school, which makes you cut back to the south right next to the school. So it's going to be a traffic jam central, okay? So if you put a 30 to 40 unit stack and pack, which is basically, I think, what 600 square foot is going to be, and that's going to be a nightmare, in my opinion, okay? So just to touch on a couple other points. The negative on the aesthetics. You know, we lived right across the street. I can't imagine the view then. I mean, basically there won't be a view. We already tolerate the train and the specialty trains. That brings me to the specialty trains that come in there and park at the end. They leave a generator on all night long with lights. We've dealt with that, okay, along with everything else. It's really a pain, and then the snow lot situation, but we have put up with all that. I just can't believe that the city would forfeit what would be an optimum parking spot if they actually came in and actually did, you know, just put some rock in there or something, which they kind of did because it was the prep area for City Hall, right?
Yeah.
For a long time, and now I know people use that place all the time for when they have all the different events in the farmers market. So it's constantly being used. Our street is full of cars that during those periods all day long, okay, from hours before they start to hours after they end. So there's no parking. You couldn't park in front of my house, Judy's, anybody, unless we've already got a car there. It's gone. The other thing is on units like that, I think the word is affordable. We spend our payment's $1,000 a month. So I'm thinking, I wonder what those are going to be. Is that going to be affordable, or why not just get a house? I doubt it's going to be much less than that. I don't know what the cost would be. I don't know who'd build it. I don't know who's making money. It always usually comes down to money anyway. So it's interesting to see how all this stuff is coming out. I just kind of found out about it myself, and we thought we'd come down here. We didn't want to miss the game tonight, but we went ahead and sacrificed that just to come down here. We don't have a DVR, so we're not recording it. And we just appreciate, Nancy and me appreciate the city council and the different people who have jobs here with the city, taking a common sense approach to this and looking at it from every point of view. I can't imagine a city that's already slammed or looks like it's growing like this and just blowing it up right in the middle. It just doesn't make sense to me. I don't know how long I'm going to be on that street, but just speaking from the common sense point and just sharing this information with you guys, you know, we'll be in the loop on it now. And I'll tell you, we haven't even talked to our neighbors around there. I'm sure we could, you know, I could put a flyer together and I could send it out to the neighbors, let them know what's going on, and we could have a lot more pushback. But right now, I understand you're just looking at it and trying to get everything together for whatever way you're going to go. So we just appreciate you letting us speak and hearing us out, and thank you.
Thanks very much, Rob. Further public comment tonight, sir?
Jan Carlson from 21 Summers. I guess as far as the WR4 goes, my feeling is that the neighborhood is a WR2, and there's only one other fourplex really in the neighborhood that's been there a long time. And my feeling is I think that it should be developed, but I also feel like it should be a WR2 development, that it should be housing either, I think that's either duplexes or single family homes, if I'm correct on that. Is that right? Okay. But I just think the character of the neighborhood and, you know, for all of us that live there, property value wise, I mean, it would be to our advantage, certainly, for it to be WR2. A couple other things about it is, if you do decide to do WR4 for this, I'd really like to see that you put some restrictions in, especially some height restrictions. I know you can go, I think, 3 stories or 35 feet. I'd like to see you reduce that to 2 stories, at least for the neighbors that have to look at it across the street. I think that would be appropriate. And just access points in and out of the parking areas to it, it would be nice if that all fed off of Columbia Avenue, in my opinion. Due to the fact there's no houses across the street, it's just a ball field for the central school. And then what's the plan for Summers Avenue from Railway towards the tracks? Is it just going to stay dirt, or sort of what's in your plan for that?
The city does not own right-of-way on Summers, north of Railway. It's owned by BNSF, so that dirt road is not a city-owned street.
So if it was developed, then whoever would develop that couldn't use that unless they got some sort of easement through Burlington Northern or something?
That's correct.
Okay. So I guess that's my other concern, that, all the traffic sort of goes out onto Columbia. But I'd like to see it WR2. Thanks.
Sure.
Talking about Summers, if you come through down Summers in the wintertime when there's snow there's cars on both sides of the street. I don't know if you've ever been down that street. You can barely get down that street. I don't know how the cars hadn't been sideswiped. Cars on both sides, and then snow, ruts everywhere because they can't get in and pave it. It's a log jam. It's already a log jam. And then one other point I had forgot to bring up was one of the things I'd be concerned about is the children's safety, because there's nobody over there working crosswalks. I don't even think there's crosswalks marked. But I can tell you myself that I pulled up to the street there. I think it's First Street. It's the one with the main street that goes by the school on the south side. And when we're pulling out on Summers, you come to a stop sign there, and we usually make a right. A lot of people are on that sidewalk there crossing the street. And I've seen a lady go by on their bicycle, and I'm watching her, and I see her look back because I'm fixing to go, and there's a kid, I mean, not this tall, on a push bike. No chain, it's just a really young child. And I couldn't even see the child if she was been in front of my car because of my hood. But since I saw the lady looking back, I was able to see the little girl coming because she was looking back at her daughter on the bike. So I would be really concerned about the traffic for the children at the school too, because that can be a real problem, and nobody wants to deal with something like that. So just one other point. Thank you.
Thanks, Rob. Rebecca.
Rebecca Norton, 530 Scott Avenue, is against this. I know it's a very popular thing, but I really am against it. I don't have a good feeling about it at all. And I like the other things that we're doing with affordable housing, where like the boarding house, that was the experimental school thing, alternative school turned into a boarding house. I like that. I like one of the churches on 2nd Street, they had a house donated to them, and their interns are housed in that. I went to the Firebrand, and I asked the guy that was making me a coffee, what about housing? And he said, oh, that was provided to us in a house by our employer. So that's what I like. I like it that we're integrating the workers into normal neighborhoods, and we're not imposing something that is very high density right next to a historic neighborhood that will devalue those people's homes. And also, I have the same feeling about this that I did when we could have bought that property at City Beach. It was during the recession, and it was like $300,000, and we couldn't afford it, but I always thought we should have gotten it because we could have expanded our public access at that point. And this site, I think, is, it's the solution that this committee has come up with, but it's right next to the railroad. There is dangerous chemicals going through there every single day. There's a lot of noise. I don't think it's the ideal place for livability. And also, I'm very concerned about how the downtown businesses will be affected when you double the amount of time to remove snow. Like some of our alleys, that's where all the deliveries are made, and those aren't even cleared a lot of the times. And so people are starting to use accessory roads in the neighborhoods to make up for parking now. And I just think we really should reconsider it. I know I am the absolute minority on this, but I wanted to put it on the record that I think it should be vetted out more completely before you commit to it as a high-density workforce housing place. Some of the amenities that we have potentially by keeping that open for parking and for storage of snow and maybe something else, I think would be better in the long run for the community. And I did ask the city manager at one point, I think it might have been Chuck though, how many places around town do we actually own? And this was the only one they said that we actually own. So I was under the impression that we still had a real estate committee that would buy things when appropriate, because Turner was on that at one point, but I guess we got rid of that.
We still have that. Andy and I are on that committee.
Don't we? Do we have any other places, or is this the only one that we have?
Let's stick to the topic here tonight, Rebecca.
So I heard that
I don't have an answer to that question.
Okay, so so I'm against it. I know it will probably go forward. I don't think it's fair to the neighborhood adjacent to it. I think it's going to provide a lot of problems in terms of parking and crowding, so, and safety. So, thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca. Further public testimony tonight on this item? Not seeing any, I'll close the public hearing and turn it back to council for discussion or a motion. Richard.
I'll go ahead and make a motion to approve ordinance 18-11, rezoning approximately 1.47 acres of land known as the snow storage lot at the northeast corner of Columbia Avenue and Railway Street in section 36, Township 31, Range 22 West, from industrial and warehousing to WR4, and adopting findings of fact with respect to such rezone.
Is there a second to the motion?
A second.
Seconded by Councilor Williams. Would you like to speak to your motion, Richard?
I would. First of all, Nancy, Robin, Jan, thank you for being here. I think it's absolutely critical that you all stay in this loop as any further discussion of plans go on. And Judy, thank you for being the sounding board for your neighbors as well, and welcoming them when they do knock on your door at whatever hour of the evening to have a discussion. And I think that that's really important, that as a community and as a neighborhood that we keep those lines of communication open. The reason I'm in favor of this is that we're just plain out of options, and until we get a rezone, we can't even begin to discuss some options. I don't think full development as an industrial site would be probably any more pleasing to the neighbors and to all of you in that neighborhood than perhaps some affordable housing. My question earlier about architectural standards, I want to encourage you as these things go forward that you engage with the Architectural Review Committee and sit in as you're able on those discussions, because that's really, and I've been to those meetings and very seldom does the public show up. But I think in this case it's going to be very, very important for the public to show up. I think that there's some things that we can do to make this perhaps a little more palatable to the neighbors, and I think it's what we really are going to have to do if we want to get a handle on any attempt at creating sufficient affordable housing in Whitefish.
Thank you, Richard. Further comments? Katie.
I'd like to say thank you to everyone who came out today to speak about the rezone of this snow lot. And I understand that this is very scary to the neighbors of this snow lot area. You don't know exactly what is going to be developed, and there's a lot of information floating around with assumptions as to what could go in. And I would very much like to encourage you, and get a hold of me whenever you'd like to chat, to be part of the public process in whatever we decide to do with the design standards and the final product for this piece of property. it's imperative that we have community buy-in and that this is the right project for this neighborhood. And this is what the public process is about, and you guys just started your journey through it, and let's keep working towards a product that everyone can be happy with. I think it will be something that 20 years down the road we'll look at and say, okay, we actually did something right. We got this, we took the time, we listened to everyone, we designed it, and didn't cut any corners to make sure that people will be happy with it, and that's what we want. We don't want to slap up a bunch of apartments and throw parking on the streets. We want to make it blend into the community and make it a place that people want to live. And so I really encourage you to come to the meetings, come to any public outreach, and contact me if you have any questions, and we'll work through this together. Thanks.
Thanks, Katie. Further discussion or comments on the motion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and the motion does carry unanimously. Michelle, thanks to you all for coming this evening. We'll move on to item 8C, which will be resolution, I believe, number 18-12, a resolution to modify the boundaries of the City of Whitefish Urban Renewal District to include a blighted area in need of redevelopment and rehabilitation, and designate such areas as appropriate for an urban renewal project, and ordinance 18-11, an ordinance relating to the amendment of the Whitefish Urban Renewal Plan, modifying the boundaries of the urban renewal district, approving the affordable housing as an urban renewal project, and the financing thereof. And again, this is on a first reading, and we will need 2 motions, I believe, for this item, if I'm not mistaken.
All right.
Dana.
Thank you. My staff report is included on page 314 of your packet. We have quite a bit of history related to this TIF boundary adjustment. The zoning change that just went through is one of the steps that had to be taken prior to going through these changes in preparation for an affordable housing project. On February 20th, the City Council unanimously approved Resolution 18-10 that set the public hearing on the proposed amendment to the Whitefish Urban Renewal Plan, which will modify the boundaries of the Urban Renewal District to include blighted area and also reaffirm affordable housing as a urban renewal project. Immediately following the approval of that resolution, staff mailed copies of the proposed amendment to the Whitefish School District and Flathead County for their consideration as required by state law. We have not received any letters or comments from the school district or the county. Since the boundary modification is to include city property, that often is the probably a reason why we haven't heard as much, because the property tax base for them will not change by bringing this property into our tax increment district. It is currently not subject to property taxes, but it is subject to assessments and will continue to be. So on March 15th, this did go before the Whitefish Planning Board. They had to adopt findings of fact, which are stated within the staff report included with my packet from Hillary. We have, they passed that at their planning board unanimously, which was to state that this amendment is in line with the growth policy. After receiving the planning board's written recommendation, we did publish notice twice. We also mailed notice to the property owner ourselves, and mailed notice also to the school and the county as required by our ordinance 95-6. After the public hearing, if the city council so chooses, and finds that a workable and feasible plan exists for making available adequate housing for any persons who may be displaced, the urban renewal plan conforms to the comprehensive plan or parts thereof for the municipality as a whole. The urban renewal plan will afford maximum opportunity consistent with the sound needs of the municipality as a whole for rehabilitation or redevelopment of the urban renewal area by private enterprise, and that a sound and adequate financial program exists for the financing of said projects.
the council may move forward with first adopting the resolution, which is a statement of blight about the property. And then subsequently, you would also adopt an ordinance that actually amends our boundaries of the district. Some of the items within the resolution creating noting that this property is blighted includes that it is a piece of property that is physically unimproved real property, and it is currently impairing the sound growth of the city and limits the provisions of housing accommodations. So while a property such as this could be used as parking, we have, through the Affordable Housing Plan, identified that this would be a property that could provide additional housing accommodations. We do have and have received complaints of illegal dumping on this property. It is within 50 yards of a middle school playground, and there has been instances of juvenile delinquency on that property. We do see transients that use the property. There are minimal infrastructure on that property. It currently lacks sidewalks and parking. While there is gravel, it is not up to our standards to be a parking lot right now. And then there is the aesthetics and appeal and landscaping that it currently has. It doesn't look very attractive, which you can see within the pictures in that as exhibits to the resolution. With that, there is no immediate financial impact to the city. Obviously, we have and continue to hear the concerns of additional costs for snow removal and hauling. While there are those costs do include additional amounts for contracting additional help so that we do get plowing done in a timely basis, so that would not be hindered. Obviously, there is a cost to that. And then the relocation of the central recycling site would also have to be considered if a project, I guess if and when a project moves forward. By bringing this property into the tax increment district boundaries, we can use tax increment funds to help any project. Generally, you see helping with public infrastructure, but we can expend tax increment funds toward this type of projects, which would include testing soils to make sure there's no contamination from the nearby railroad yard and other items that might come up. So staff respectfully recommends approval of the proposed resolution and ordinance after your public hearing.
Thanks, Dana. Appreciate it. Any questions for Dana on her staff report? Not seeing any. We did advertise for a public hearing on what will be our own resolution 18-12 and ordinance 18-12. Public testimony, please, and name and address for the record. Any public testimony on this item? Not seeing any. I'll go ahead and close the public hearing and turn it back to council for a motion. Katie.
Can I combine the two?
Two separate motions, please.
I move to approve resolution number 18-12, a resolution to modify the boundaries of the city Whitefish urban designated as such areas, wow, I can't read today, such areas as appropriate for an urban renewal project.
Is there a second to the motion on the resolution? Seconded by Councilor Fury. Further discussion? All those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and that motion carries unanimously, Michelle. And now we'll need an ordinance. Motion for ordinance 18-12. Katie.
Let me try this again. I move to approve ordinance 18-13?
12.
18-12, an ordinance related, relating to the amendment of the Whitefish Urban Renewal Plan, modifying the boundaries of the Urban Renewal District, approving the affordable housing as an urban renewal project, and the financing thereof. First reading.
Thanks, Katie. Is there a second to the motion? Seconded by Councilor Fury. Further discussion on the motion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and that's unanimous as well, Michelle. And we're going to go ahead and recess for about 5 minutes because we have a public presentation on our Wisconsin Avenue corridor plan coming on our next item. Oh, I think before that. We're going to go ahead and get started. If folks could take their seats, please. And we'll move on to item 8D, which will be Resolution 18-13, our intent to adopt the Wisconsin Avenue Corridor Plan as amendment to the 2007 Whitefish City County Growth Policy. I kind of polled the audience, and it doesn't sound like anyone's here who would like to spend time reviewing the PowerPoint presentation. We held our work session, and we had the luxury of seeing the presentation in the work session. Is there anyone here that's dying to see the PowerPoint presentation? Okay, so with that said, we'll go ahead. We'll skip the PowerPoint, and we'll turn it directly over to Dave for an overview of the plan, and then if we have questions, Kate McMahon's here as well as our planning consultant on this project. Dave.
Good evening. Direct you to page 337 of your packet. That is where the staff report for this item is. Started about a year and a half ago. You guys appointed a steering committee that was appointed to direct the path of this particular plan. We held a workshop, open house at the Whitefish Lake Lodge, where we got input from the community that kind of began this process. And this plan looks at and reviews the future development and policies for Wisconsin Avenue from the Baker, Wisconsin Avenue viaduct over the railroad tracks at Edgewood all the way to East Lakeshore Drive just past Big Mountain Road. And the boundaries generally a block off of Wisconsin Avenue, but there's some areas where we included more than that because they were more affected by this particular plan. So over the course of many, many meetings, the steering committee went through the plan kind of sort of item by item as we developed it chapter by chapter and vetted it through the committee. Had quite a bit of public involvement on certain aspects of the plan, including the key development areas, which where we looked at very specific areas that had a lot of potential for redevelopment because they're either underdeveloped or all under one ownership. So the plan establishes guiding principles for future development as it went through the existing conditions of the corridor and then looked at socioeconomic trends, land uses, transportation, infrastructure. Then we looked at the environment and existing neighborhoods, urban design, and the economic performance of the corridor. All that stuff's in the plans, and then the plan put together goals and policies and updated the future land use maps. And as I mentioned, the key development areas were kind of some of the specific stuff that we looked at in the plan. As far as changes to the existing zoning and or future land uses, it really calls for some minimal changes. There was a few areas that were modified where the existing zoning or the future land use didn't mesh with the existing uses. And the growth policy maps for the 2007 growth policy didn't maybe line up with some of the existing uses in there. We developed or identified those four major areas, as I mentioned, where there's a combination of consolidation of ownership or underutilized land use. The most controversial of those was the Big Mountain Road intersection that was owned by Glacier Ranch Holdings. The committee spent quite a bit of time discussing how that property might develop. Early in the process, they proposed sort of a very sort of vague development proposal where the properties along the lake might have some sort of a lodge with a marina and then a conference center on the north side of the road with some condo-style housing kind of all tied together. The committee looked at that, looked at the potential future land uses that might accommodate that, but in the end, they determined that they wanted to leave the future land use as suburban residential. That would preclude that kind of a development, but maybe encourage more workforce housing in that area. There is a large potential for development for the properties on the north side. They are just zoned high-density residential and two-family residential. Basically, those lots could host about 344 units as a use by right currently. That's a lot of housing. And then his property to the north of that, another 79 units could be developed on those 28 acres. And so there's a large potential for development. One of the things the committee considered with that is, you know, what could the kind of benefits could the city get out of a large development there? You know, potentially intersection improvements. They talked a little bit about a roundabout potential or a stoplight. We looked at the possibility of a satellite fire station there. That's an area where when we moved a fire station from this location out to where it is now, it increased the distance that a fire truck would have to drive to get to there, and thus insurance rates in that part of the community potentially went up because of that, and having a satellite fire station might improve those rates in the future and also provide quicker access to wildfires and such in that vicinity. And so there is some potential for that as that site develops. And so that's one of the reasons why the committee spent time looking at that and at least vetting some of the owner's potential ideas there, but in the end they chose not to change it from the future land use that's currently in place in our growth policy. But as it develops with that overlay, I think it'll provide for at least the ability to blend that type of development in with the suburban low-density residential development around that, with still recognizing that it probably will develop in an urban density. The other key development area is West Edgewood, the site of an existing trailer park along there. The property owner is looking to redevelop that as residential, and they asked the committee to potentially change that future land use from neighborhood commercial to high-density residential, and so the plan accommodates that. And then the gravel pit across from Alpine Village Market, that future land use was resort residential. The plan didn't change that, but some parameters were put in place to kind of control how that might develop. And I think that the project that was recently approved for that site follows most of those guidelines. At the planning board hearing, which I'll talk about in a little bit, there was a request to change some of the future land use map around Skiles Avenue, where there's the existing former Can-Am Motors and storage units in there. The owners would like to redevelop that as residential, high-density residential. It's surrounded by future land use of high-density residential. So that was one of the changes the planning board made, was to modify that, to change those properties from a future land use of neighborhood commercial to high-density residential. So those are some of the specific areas. So one of the major points of the plan is the action items, which are the implementation items once the plan is adopted. One of those is to review the land use regulations to provide for future Wisconsin Avenue right-of-way acquisition. So that would mean increasing some of the setbacks along there as properties develop. That's something that we'll have to add to our zoning code for the B1 and some of the high-density residential along that corridor. Another one is to evaluate options for road widening, turn lanes, curbs, parkways, and intersection improvements along Wisconsin Avenue. That's probably going to have to be done as part of a transportation study. Another one would be identify options to expand transit and develop park and ride lots. Both recent projects on Wisconsin Avenue, Jim Stack's office building and the condo cabins are going to be developed on the other side of the road at the old trailer park. Both are including park and ride lots for the snow bus. So some of those implementation items are already happening. Another one is identify potential traffic calming solutions for Colorado Avenue. There's a lot of concern about speed on there. Another one is conduct an engineering study to address stormwater management issues for Viking Creek. And the planning board added to that particular action item as the Batten Conservancy property as well. There has been some concern about that wetland backing it up because there's not enough drainage underneath Wisconsin Avenue, or it's being blocked by development that's happening on the lake side of Wisconsin. Another item is adopt tree preservation guidelines. Another is to conduct feasibility study for emergency services facilities near the Big Mountain Road intersection. Another one is looking at the architectural review standards to expand design districts as needed to include any new commercial areas and address compatibility issues between uses and some of the other policy recommendations. Another one was to form a Wisconsin Avenue neighborhood business group to look at that particular business area, to do branding in order to identify that as an area, much like the railway district. Some names were thrown out like the Lake and Mountain District or something like that. And that's something that neighborhood commercial entities out there will probably look into, maybe form some kind of a commercial association like Heart of Whitefish. Implementation or develop gateway treatment designs, viaduct and Big Mountain Road intersection, and implement bicycle pedestrian master plan recommendations and continue exploring options for improving that bike ped network. Another implementation item is coordinating with development code revisions to draft ordinance language that promotes the goals and policies of the corridor plan. Another one is to look at that city-owned parcel that's just north of the last chair in Reservoir Road and determine the best use of that property and make sure that it's not an unusable wetland. Look at other potential uses for that, snow bus pullout or some other type of thing. And then finally, look at the lakeshore regulations and or the zoning regulations to address concerns about the practice of pyramiding, which is allowing access to the lake through a homeowner park. So as far as relationship with the growth policy, in order to implement this, the corridor plan was called for in the growth policy. We established priorities for corridor plans, and we started with Highway 93 West. This Wisconsin Avenue plan was next on the list, and then we're about to begin a Highway 93 South corridor plan. So this is an implementation of one of the goals of the growth policy. And the goals held within this Wisconsin Avenue plan work towards a healthy, efficient, and visually attractive corridor, which is one of the policies. It's facilitated and funded by the city as part of our action items in the growth policy. And then obviously we've been meticulously going forward with the implementation of this, and it fulfills the intent of recommended action 9 from the growth policy that would facilitate this corridor plan. So as I mentioned, the steering committee forwarded it to the Whitefish Planning Board. They held a public hearing on February 15th. They decided to hold off on making a recommendation at that meeting and held a second meeting on March 15th. There was quite a bit of public comment. Several people were there to support the Big Mountain Road intersection, having a resort residential future land use, and supported Joe Gregory's plans to have that be a resort residential use. There were some people that had concerns about impacts to Monks Bay. As I mentioned, Mark Johnson was there to talk about the Can-Am Motor site, and I think the planning board accommodated his desire to see that as multifamily residential. Mary Flowers spoke asking about transportation issues. I was concerned if there was more short-term rentals, which the plan doesn't increase short-term rentals in that area. And she didn't want to see franchise businesses, and she didn't want to see resort commercial at the Big Mountain Road intersection. And again, WGM Group was there on behalf of that property owner at Big Mountain Road, and they said they would support resort residential or urban for that, and then they were planning on doing something beautiful and possibly doing a fire station. At the second time the planning board reviewed it, they did not hold the public hearing, but there was people that spoke under public comments. Rhonda Fitzgerald was there, and she wanted to see the default zoning in place and not high density for the future land use. Again, Mark Johnson spoke at the Skiles Avenue property. There was one of the neighbors that lived on the lake, Valerie Bosch, that had concerns about density and lake quality. Again, Mary Flowers was there, was concerned about future land use map changes across from the Batten Wetland Preserve. And then again, Bruce Lutz was there on behalf of WGM Group, talking about the Big Mountain Road intersection. Planning Board reviewed all those comments, and at that hearing, they made a unanimous recommendation to forward this with a recommendation approval. And as I mentioned, they did have those map changes and changes to pages 4.4, 4.5, and 4.12 of the plan to include that Can-Am Motor site as high-density residential. And then they added that action item, which is on page 5.3 of the plan, that was changed to say, conduct an engineering study to address stormwater management issues for Viking Creek and the Batten Conservancy property. Staff does recommend approval, and I'd be glad to answer any questions. And we do have Kate McMahon, who was the consultant on the project, and then she can give you more detail on anything that you have more questions on.
Thanks, Dave. Any questions for Dave or Kate for that matter? Not seeing any yet. We did advertise for a public hearing on what will be Resolution 18-13. We'll hold that public hearing now. Any public comment tonight on this item? Any public comments? I'll go ahead and close the public hearing and turn it back to the council for a motion. Richard.
I'll move to approve Resolution 18-13, a resolution of intention to adopt the Wisconsin Avenue Corridor Plan as an amendment to the 2007 Whitefish City-County Growth Policy, WGPA 18-02, as described in the packet.
Is there a second to the motion?
I'll second.
Seconded by Melissa. Would you like to speak to your motion?
I just find it really interesting that we sat through 2 hearings at the planning board with 30 or 40 people in the audience all wanting to speak, and when it really comes down to a decision, there's no one here. I just don't know where everybody is. Maybe it was the basketball game. But maybe we should have put a hoop and had a basketball. I don't know. I'm really disappointed that there weren't more people or anyone here to speak either on behalf or in opposition. But the planning board did do due diligence and came up with the recommendation.
Thanks, Richard. Further comments from the council? Andy?
I guess just a really quick comment. One, thanks, Kate. It was a great process, and I think we came up with a really great product as being a member of the committee. I think the Big Mountain Turn, the biggest problem we had there was the fact that we're trying to decide a 20-year plan, and we had this big elephant of a project that they kept trotting out in front of us. And we kept trying to craft both the future land use map, zoning or policies or direction or whatever to kind of meet that proposed project when nobody wanted it. Basically, with the exception of the landowner, almost 100% of the committee and every neighbor and everybody that came really wanted to see the future land use map stay the same. They liked the rural character there. They were concerned about commercial development there and creating a connect the dots strip from the viaduct all the way out. And I think once we finally got over that, that's when we came up with a workable solution and what we ultimately saw here. But I think any time when you're looking at future plan and you've got people bringing projects in that they want to build tomorrow, it's hard for committees to do that. So anyway, I think that was really the biggest and the hardest part of it that we had. But other than that, I think we came with a great product. I'm surprised there's nobody here too. But anyway, there you go.
Thanks for your work on the committee, Andy, and staff for that matter. Kate, I know you probably put in more time than you were perhaps contracted for. I'm just guessing, but you're used to that in Whitefish, right? The public process is oftentimes more arduous than we anticipate. With that said, all those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. All those opposed, like sign, and the motion carries unanimously. Thanks. And finally, we'll move on to our last public hearing, which will be 8E, Resolution 18-14, amending Resolution number 10-24, establishing a fee schedule for documents provided to the public. Angie.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. My staff report starts on page 547 of the packet. And actually, Adam and I tag team this resolution, so I'll give him the credit or the blame, as the case may be. About 3 years ago, the legislature revised our Freedom of Information statutes and clarified that cities can charge a fee to cover staff time in responding to public records requests, which sometimes can take quite a while. They also refined the statutes to provide that we can ask for their fees up front before we provide the information. And in about the last 6 months, we've had several public records requests that required considerable staff time. And so Adam and I decided it might be a good idea to actually start charging for that staff time because it can take days sometimes, or hours. I went through 3,000 emails to respond to one. So we haven't actually adjusted our rates for providing copies, media, since 2010. So Adam went through and just slightly increased the fees for actually providing the information. And the resolution also sets fees for reimbursement of staff time required to fulfill public records requests. And what we did is we took, the Department of Justice does it this way, so we basically took 3 classifications and we just did averages of, the employees that frequently respond to records requests to kind of get an administrative, professional, and executive level. The resolution also clarifies that before we provide the public records request, we'll actually ask for payment because that's been somewhat of an issue for us. So the financial impact, I mean, it's probably going to not be significant, but it'll be nice to be able to recover staff time that we spend doing that. So staff respectfully recommends the City Council adopt the resolution, and I can answer any questions.
Thanks, Angie. Any questions for Angie? Richard?
Is there any, I got to thinking about it as I was going through the packet today, any concern or worry if someone who could provide their own DVD or flash drive corrupt our system? Is that a worry?
That's way above my IT level.
Well, it's above mine too, but not above mine to ask the question.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something we could coordinate with Matt or Tanya.
But I would say yes.
Okay, I just think it'd be nice to have that protection somehow.
You know, and maybe in the motion, we just remove the they provide and we provide.
We provide and charge.
We provide it and charge and,
Okay.
and just remove those two lines.
That to me is the safest thing to
Yep,
do
I would agree.
at this juncture.
So we need to hold the public hearing
Oh,
briefly.
yeah.
And then we'll
Public
take,
hearing. I didn't see that.
then we'll take your motion. Any further questions of staff? We did advertise for a public hearing on Resolution 18-14. Anyone wishing to provide comment, now is your opportunity. And I'll go ahead and close the public hearing. Richard?
I'll go ahead and make the motion to approve Resolution 18-14, establishing a fee schedule for documents, and then do you want a friendly amendment to the?
Please.
And I'll do that now, and that is to remove any reference to DVDs or flash drives provided by the requestor.
That'll be a friendly amendment. We'll vote on the amendment before the original motion's cast. All those in favor of the amendment, please raise your hand. Or please, I need a second, actually, excuse me. Seconded by Councilor Sweeney. All those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and that carries unanimously.
Now you want to go back to the original
Please.
motion?
Which I will second as well.
Okay.
Seconded by Councilor Sweeney. Would you just like to formally state that motion?
Yes, to approve Resolution 18-14, amending Resolution 10-24, establishing a fee schedule for documents provided to the public.
Thanks, Richard. That was seconded by Councilor Sweeney. All those in favor of the motion as amended, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and that carries unanimously as well. Thanks, Ange. That'll move us on to item 9A, consideration of approval of an application from Deborah and Gregory Henders for a Whitefish Lake and Lakeshore variance located at 1648 West Lakeshore Drive for placement of large boulders exceeding riprap height and slope requirements and extending lakeward of mean high water elevation. Bailey.
Yay. So I had a joke with Wendy that I was like, I'm not going to get out of here till 10 o'clock. And I'm actually pretty darn close. So I was actually pretty good tonight. This is WLV 18-W01. This is a little bit of a different setup, mainly because there's actually three parts to this application. There's an administrative permit part, which typically you don't see. That's done by me and staff in the planning office. There's a standard permit, which typically go through the Lakeshore Committee and then to you, and then there's the minor variance. For ease, they combined all of it into one permit, paid one fee instead of having to pay a little bit extra to do multiple permits. So really, you guys are looking at the standard permit part and the minor variance, but I'm going to talk about all of it because it's really one big project for this property. As the mayor said, this is at 1648 West Lakeshore Drive. So the administrative portion of the permit is to install an E-shaped dock that's less than 60 feet long with their proposed gangway. They're also going to, or the total amount of constructed area for the dock would be approximately 677.5 square feet. The second activity would be the installation of a shore station that would be located south of the dock. That would not include a canopy, and that is included as a proposed condition in the draft. And as I said, the administrative activities, they don't go to the Lakeshore Protection Committee for a recommendation. They're just looked in our office. The third activity was the installation of a water line. They have included documentation that they do have a water right from the DNRC, and that was with the application submitted and as part of your packet. And then the final administrative activity was the replacement of an existing buoy. The subject property does comply with the minimum frontage requirements, and there is a condition that the buoy has to be within 100 feet of the shoreline, and that's proposed as condition 45 with our standards. So we weren't sure the exact placement of the existing buoy, but they do have to put it in 100 feet. And it was pretty darn close when we measured it at the Lakeshore Committee. So then the standard permit portion, these are typically what come to you, not as a variance, just a standard activity. They are proposing to install a stone stairway and walkway that would be within the Lakeshore Protection Zone. There currently is an existing set of wooden stairs that would be replaced by 11 stone stairs, 4 feet wide is the maximum width that we allow, and then a flagstone walkway. The stone stairs and the walkway would be approximately 108 square feet of constructed area. And also as part of the project, they're proposing to revegetate the property with some native plantings, and that includes the placement of cedar mulch within the Lakeshore Protection Zone, which is an allowed activity as well. So the constructed area for the dock, as I said, would be approximately 677.5 square feet. The stone stairs and the flagstone path are also included in the constructed area allowance. That was 108, minus the existing wooden that they're placing out. They'd end up at 797.5 square feet. The total that they're allowed is 802, so they are within that allowance. So now the minor variance portion. So they're proposing to repair and maintain the existing riprap that's currently located along the high water elevation. As you can see in a lot of the pictures, the existing riprap has failed or deteriorated over the years, leaving eroded bare ground behind that. They've researched a number of options, including the installation of a concrete retaining wall. However, they've proposed that this project is determined to be the least impactful to the lake rather than a retaining wall. And so they're requesting a variance to 4 sections of the Lakeshore regulations, and I'll just go over those. One is that the riprap would be placed at or landward of the mean annual high water elevation. Some of it is a little bit lower than mean annual high water. It kind of fluctuates because the bank isn't a straight linear line. The riprap placement would follow the contour of the existing shoreline and be sloped at no greater than 1 horizontal to 2 vertical in order to dissipate waves. And most of this, as I'll get into later, is almost literally up and down. There's no slope laying back to be able to do that. They would limit the riprap should be limited to 18 inches in vertical height. And then the size of the rock should be between 6 to 12 inches in diameter with an 18-inch maximum diameter. And they're proposing to place some large boulders instead to kind of support and stabilize the toe of the riprap strategically. And Bruce can get into more detail than I can with that as well. So reviewing our minor variance, there's 4 criteria that have to be met in order to grant approval. As I said, the existing bank is approximately 5 feet in height in some areas and almost completely vertical in the majority of the area. In order to comply with the current regulations and the slope standards, they would have to do major resloping along the property, and that would include cutting or filling approximately 7.5 horizontal feet of shoreline, so quite a big regrading of the site. And they had an option of installing a concrete retaining wall. That's typically most people's thought is just go right to a retaining wall. But our Lakeshore regulations actually state that we prefer to see riprap placed and installed prior to trying to go to that kind of end result of a concrete retaining wall to see if the riprap would work, as it looks more like a natural shoreline instead of just a rock-faced concrete retaining wall. So they are proposing to utilize some of the existing riprap along the shore or along the bank with the placement of these larger boulders to help stabilize that shoreline. So due to the unusual topographic circumstances on the property, which also include some existing mature trees that they do want to save along the shoreline, the overall bank height, strict enforcement of the regulations could cause more disturbance to the overall Lakeshore Protection Zone. There were 3 alternatives that they've provided. And all three of those had the potential to cause more impacts to the Lakeshore Protection Zone, and actually would require approval and issuance of major lakeshore variances. Also, two of the alternatives would require the issuance and approval of a floodplain development permit for the placement of fill below the 100-year floodplain regulations, which is prohibited in our floodplain development standards. So there aren't any reasonable alternatives that would exist that would meet those standards. The proposed variance would not materially diminish water quality, diminish fish or wildlife habitat, create a public nuisance. It would alter the characteristics of the shoreline, but as I said, this option would be the least impactful out of all of the options that they do have. And then the design would also help maintain the existing shoreline and potentially minimize any visual impacts that may be viewed from the lake. General benefits from the variance would include, as I said, minimizing potential for further erosion and lake sedimentation by providing a more stable lakeshore and visual impacts to the property. Staff does feel that they meet the criteria for the variance. Back to the thing. So staff recommended approval of the Lakeshore variance dated March 7th with 51 proposed conditions. The Lakeshore Protection Committee met on March 21st and considered the request. And at that meeting, I did recommend striking, it's currently numbered, condition number 13. I worried about renumbering them for you. So it's currently condition number 13. And I realized that they're actually asking a variance to the riprap height. And I put that in there that it would be what the standard is. So I'm recommending that that be struck from the proposed conditions. And the Lakeshore Committee voted to recommend approval of the application with that condition struck as well. And that was voted on a 3-to-1 vote. The applicant's representative also spoke at that meeting, and there were no members of the public there as well. So I did include a proposed finding of fact for approval and also a motion if you so choose. Bruce is here. He can answer a lot more of the technical questions if you have, but I am happy to answer what I can.
Thanks, Bailey. Any questions for Bailey? Andy?
Yeah, I was just on, let's see, page 592, photo 1. Is it 592? I just noticed that there's an excavator in that picture. They already started work?
592. Which picture?
Yeah, there's an excavator in that picture. Right here, see?
Oh.
It's kind of small.
I'm like, what? Like, I don't see this. What is he talking about? Yeah, you know, it's for those.
It's gonna take a while.
Well played.
That was my
Thanks.
only question.
That was his joke at 9:30 at night, you know.
I have a question, Bailey.
Sure.
I'm a bit confused as to why a floodplain development permit is not required, considering they're placing fill below the 100-year flood elevation.
We've exempted riprap as minor, basically a minor fill permit from requiring a floodplain development permit. So that's in we have a section in our floodplain regulations, a separate chapter that we've created that exempts certain activities. Okay. So one of those is docks, water lines, the majority of activities. Riprap is kind of one we consider a minor disturbance, but the work that they would have to do to re-slope and regrade and put something like that in would well exceed what we would be able to exempt out, so.
So they will not be applying for a floodplain permit?
No, not with, if the variance is approved, that's what they're trying to get away from doing. Their other options that they did have would require a floodplain development permit.
Thanks.
So.
I'll save my other questions for Bruce.
Okay.
Richard?
Oh, Bailey, is the existing, just curious, is the existing stairway constructed of pressure-treated lumber? Do you know?
I don't know.
Do you know, Bruce?
My guess would probably be no, but.
Okay. It's good to have it gone.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Thanks, Bailey. Yep. Oh, Frank, sorry.
Maybe this is for Bruce or for Bailey. Refresh my recollection. What is rip-rap?
You want the technical definition?
I want a definition so I can understand what I'm talking about here. I kind of understand what gabions are, which would seem to be an appropriate.
Riprap's encased in gabions.
Okay.
So it's basically just, it's typically angular rock, but in this case, the lakeshore regs require that
So
they be semi-rounded, rounded.
But it is gabions, so they're not going to be
They won't be caged, they won't be
Yeah.
enclosed in
They will not be.
Gabion
They will
baskets,
not,
but it's the same type of material. It's just not encased.
Okay.
It's just rock.
Yeah, it's
basically.
basically just a wall that's stacked of rock. It's basically a layman way of saying that, so. Mhm.
Bruce, do you have anything to add on behalf of the applicant? If you don't mind, I've got a few. I think we implemented a project years ago in front of Bay Point that incorporated large boulders, correct? Didn't you work on that project? I'm going back
Yes.
10 or 15 years now.
Yes.
What is the intent of the larger 3-foot diameter boulders in addition to just the riprap?
If we can go back to photo 6.
Photo 6?
Yep.
Okay.
And this kind of answers Frank's question about what is riprap. That's riprap. And what's happened with the size of the riprap here and no larger rocks to kind of break the wave action, the rock does not stay in place. It gets moved around by the wave action.
And ice.
And ice. And so now what you find is that when we get to high water and we get any wave action, the waves are actually hitting the exposed clay bank behind the riprap. So the intent of the larger rock is to help break the wave action and to stabilize the smaller rock back against the bank.
Do you have an estimate on the number of pieces of the 36-inch diameter rock or cubic yardage that will be placed?
I think we had about 20 to 30.
Boulders?
Yeah.
Okay. And then in terms of the riprap quantity?
We think that there's probably enough riprap there.
Oh.
So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to peel that riprap back down, set our big boulders, get them in a formation where we think it will break the wave action the best, and then start to set this existing rock back in behind the new larger rock.
So no additional riprap
No,
will
we don't
likely
think
be
so.
imported?
Yep.
Okay. And then finally, are you applying for a 404 permit, considering you're placing material below the ordinary high water mark of the lake?
Well, actually, our intent isn't to, we're going to stay within the bounds of what's there now. We're
Some
not
of-
going to expand lakeward
Below ordinary high water?
below where the riprap is now.
Okay.
There may be some places, because what we found is that if you just keep this straight line, it's not much better than a retaining wall as far as breaking the force of the waves. So the good thing about what's there now is the meandering base of the rock, and
Okay.
that's what we're going to stay within.
Okay. Thanks, Bruce. Further questions for Bruce from the council? Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Discussion, motion? Frank?
Excuse me. I got a question that, but.
Sure.
I'm going to move to approve the application of Deborah and Gregory Henders of Whitefish for Lakeshore variance at 1648 West Lakeshore Drive.
Is there a second to the motion?
A second.
Seconded by Councilor Williams. Further discussion on the motion?
I just have a question, and given what's happened here, Bruce, and is there some, I apologize now for any ignorance that I'm expressing. Why would we not prefer to have something like this encased in gabions? Baskets, that way it won't be sliding down. It would have a more likelihood of staying where we're putting it as opposed to trying to simply anchor it with additional rock. I mean, is there a reason we can't use gabions, or you wouldn't use gabions in this circumstance?
So we did look at options, and I don't think gabions are much different than a retaining wall. I mean, the rock is encased so tightly, there isn't much variation in the face of it. So what happens with a retaining wall is when the wave action hits it, the waves actually accelerate along the wall. And then when it gets to the neighboring property where there is no wall, then the whole force of those waves hits their banks. So we've actually put quite a few walls in along the lake, and we've done it where we actually feel it's absolutely necessary. Because of the position of this property, we're hopeful, and the Henders were willing to go along with it, that this riprap will be a long-term solution. And it's, again, as Bailey said, out of all the alternatives, we feel it's the least impactful to the lake. There is the risk that it won't hold.
And I'm not quarreling. I'm really not. One of the nice things about at least gabions in my experience is that they can contour around corners and undulations, and they don't have to act like a wall. In other words, they can be laid back. What I like about gabions is that you put them in those baskets, they're probably not going anyplace. But so I just didn't know whether there was a reason you wouldn't do that again if you're looking for a more permanent solution. Because I know how they can wrap around corners, and I've had it experienced. So that was my question. So anyway, you get to choose. But.
Yep, well, actually, we feel that the riprap is a much better looking, more natural looking, and that's one of the things that the lakeshore is looking for too.
Further comments? I guess I'll comment. There's obviously areas along the lake where there really aren't alternatives to retaining walls or riprap, this site most likely being one of them. But every time we permit one of these things, I cringe. Like the idea of just riprapping, the shorelines, for the sake of stability when there's other alternatives available that I think we need to explore as part of an update to our lakeshore regulations. We have a scientist out of Yellow Bay, Mark Lorang, who's done experimental wave breaks and shoreline stabilization projects on Flathead Lake that incorporate bioengineering type applications. And this isn't a criticism to you, Bruce, at all, but I just really implore our committee and the city to look outside of the box at some of these alternative treatments that are available, because I'm afraid down the road we're going to end up with a lake shore that's completely artificial and lined with riprap and rock and walls, and it's not really where we should be heading as a community. And again, that's not maybe related to this project, Bruce, just a general policy comment in general from my perspective. With that said, we do have a motion on the table, and that has been seconded. Anything further, Bruce?
No, I just wanted to say that we have worked with Mark on numerous projects, and it would be something for the committee here to look at.
Yeah.
But right now, under our regulations, you can't build those gravel beaches.
That's right. And I mean, our regulations encourage the use of stone riprap in lieu of a mechanical retaining wall. And I think there's better solutions out there. So possibly something we can bring back to the Lakeshore Committee and something they can look into. So thanks, Bruce.
Thank you.
Yep. All those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and the motion does carry unanimously. And we're finally on to Craig for the evening, who just got back from Nicaragua, so I don't feel too bad that we're running late.
Not at all.
And we'll start with item 10A, consideration of awarding our contract for the Summers Avenue reconstruction project to Sandry Construction.
Yep, thank you very much. I think judging from the crowd and the hour, I'm going to run through this pretty quick. We've talked about this project on a number of occasions in the past, so I'll just hit the highlights, but I'm happy to report that we have completed the bidding process for the Summers Avenue project. This will be about 2,400 feet of roadway. It's the next project in the resort tax list of projects. It goes from East 2nd Street to East 8th Street. We've held a number of public meetings. We've had a number of newsletters that have gone out, and we've had quite a bit of public feedback. The council did approve the final plans for bidding back in February, and so that took place. The bidding process was completed about 2 weeks ago. We opened bids on the 15th of March and did receive 5 bids. It was a good turnout. We were happy with that. The bids range from about 12.5 to about 33.5% under the engineer's estimate of 1.8, roughly $1.9 million. So Sandry Construction was the low bidder. They were at $1,659,362. We have $2.2 million budgeted for the project. So with that construction estimate, assuming that we do move forward with Sandry, with that construction cost and the estimated engineering, I expect that we can bring this project in about 10% under budget. So with that in mind, I do recommend that council award this contract to Sandry Construction out of Big Fork, Montana, in the amount of $1,659,362.
Thanks, Craig. Any questions for Craig? I really appreciated how you guys are addressing all of the uncontrolled intersections. In particular, I used to live at the corner of Summers and 3rd on the northeast corner, and people used to jet down 3rd Street getting out of school or going for their lunch break at 50, 60 miles an hour. No exaggeration. Bill's laughing, but I lived there, Bill. So I appreciate those intersections being addressed as part of this project. Okay. We'll need a motion to approve the contract. Frank.
I would move to approve awarding the contract to for the Somers Avenue reconstruction project to Sandry Construction Company in the amount of $1.659,362.
Is there a second to the motion?
Second.
Seconded by Melissa. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and that motion does carry unanimously. And we'll stay with Craig for item 10B.
All right, this one's even quicker. So now that we have awarded Summers, it's time to look at the next project, which is the State Park reconstruction project. As I get to it, short and sweet, the council has a selection policy on hiring engineers and architects. Basically requires that council approve both a selection committee, or excuse me, a nomination committee as well as a selection committee. And so I'm recommending, based on that policy, that council nominate Karin Hilding and myself on the nomination committee. We did advertise for RFPs, and we've received 5 of them. So Karin and I would go through and we'd whittle those down to most likely 3 companies that we would interview. The council policy then requires that you guys nominate a final selection committee, which would be, needs to have 1 council member. So I'm recommending council nominate Karin and myself, as well as 1 council member to be on that selection committee. So I think you can do it via 1 motion. Karin and I would be the nomination committee, and Karin and I and one of you guys would be on the selection committee.
Thanks, Craig. If you so desire, I'd volunteer to be on that selection committee with Craig and Karin. I participated, I think, on our last round and really enjoyed it, unless you guys, someone else interested.
For what it's worth, this one will be a lot quicker because we're looking at 1 project. On that last round of interviews, I think we had
5 or 6
projects and I think 4 or 5 interviews. So,
cool. Thanks, Craig. We'll need a motion appointing Craig and Karin to the rating panel, and then a second motion appointing Craig and Karin and myself, if that's your desire, to the selection panel.
I'll go ahead and make a motion to appoint, help me here with the nomenclature, Craig and Karin to the nominating committee, and then in addition, Mayor Mofeld to the rating committee. Am I close?
Selection panel.
Selection panel.
there a second to the motion?
Second.
Seconded by Counselor Sweeney. Further discussion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and that's unanimous. Thanks, Craig. Any idea when that may occur, the selection committee meeting?
Karen and I will likely go through the RFPs this week or next, and then we can correspond with you and figure out a good day. It'll
Great.
probably be a morning, we can get through it in two or 3 hours easily,
Perfect, thanks.
so we'll figure that out.
We'll move on to item 11. We have Adam's report in front of us. Any questions for Adam on his manager's report? Adam, anything new to report on?
Not at this time.
Great, thank you. And we'll move on to communications from the city council. Richard, would you like to start?
Sure. Other than, I've asked, actually, Michelle to go ahead and draft up a letter to our congressional delegation that would encourage local hearings on local wilderness study areas for the signature of mayor and council members. Ryan's not here, and in his signature space, we could just write "not available for a signature," if that's acceptable to the rest of the council.
Yes.
Thanks, Richard. Thanks for putting that together. Andy?
Nothing.
Katie?
Nothing.
Frank?
I'm good for this evening, thanks.
Melissa?
Nothing to add.
All right, I just have a reminder, we're still on for our council retreat, just because Richard's going to be coming in, I think, really late on the evening of the 22nd, if not the morning of the 23rd. I think the plan is to head down Monday afternoon, the 23rd, and we can meet that evening and then do the bulk of the retreat on Tuesday when Adam arrives in the afternoon as well, and then wrap up and head home. Is everyone still okay with that schedule? 23rd and 24th? You can't be there. Okay, so do we want to reschedule? Do we want to reschedule? I assume you probably want to attend, correct?
I would like to,
Yeah, so let's go ahead and try to get something. I'll get with Adam, maybe we can do a doodle poll, and Ryan's not here tonight either, so there's no need to go through our schedules this evening without Ryan present, so I'll work with Adam or Michelle on a doodle poll, and we'll just kick it down the road a little bit. And I think that's all I had. Anything further from staff on any of the direction provided tonight? How about council? Thanks, everyone. We're adjourned.
Heidi, you were the